Bet on Us. A small-town romantic comedy with fake dating, grumpy mechanics, and grandmas who don't mind their business. By Win Valentine. Copyright 2025 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without written permission from the author, except for the use of brief quotations in a book review. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities, is entirely coincidental. Win Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco. 1. Sold to the Sunshine. Harper licked powdered sugar from her fingertips, savoring the crisp autumn air that carried the scent of cinnamon and apple cider across the town square. The Fall Harvest Festival was Briar Hollow at its most picturesque, warm lamplight spilling over hay bales, handmade garlands of maple leaves strung between lampposts, and fairy lights twinkling through the trees. She'd purposely positioned herself at the back of the crowd, content to enjoy her funnel cake in relative peace while half listening to Vernon Miller's enthusiastic auctioneering. "Next up, folks, we've got a real treat for you ladies," Vernon crooned into the microphone. "Or anyone in need of automotive expertise." Harper perked up slightly, but remained focused on extracting a particularly stubborn piece of fried dough that had adhered itself to the paper plate. "Someone's approaching the stage looking like we kidnapped him," Lila observed, sipping hot chocolate beside her. "This should be good." Harper glanced up just in time to see Wesley Hawthorne stepping onto the makeshift platform with all the enthusiasm of a man approaching his own execution. Despite his obvious reluctance, he cut an impressive figure in a clean flannel shirt and dark jeans that hugged his frame in ways that would have been distracting if Harper weren't so amused by his thundercloud expression. Lila nudged her ribs, nearly upending her funnel cake. "There's your future husband," she teased, voice pitched low enough that only Harper could hear. She pointed to where Wes stood stiffly, hands stuffed in pockets, eyes scanning the perimeter like he was plotting escape routes. "What do you think? Is the town mechanic rugged enough to handle a woman with 26 plant children and a penchant for craft emergencies?" "Hush," Harper hissed, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "He looks miserable." It was true. Where the previous bachelors had hammed it up for the crowd, flexing biceps or striking comedic poses, Wes stood motionless, jaw tight and shoulders hunched against the autumn chill, or more likely against the mortification of being paraded in front of the entire town. "Folks, Wesley Hawthorne needs no introduction," Vernon was saying. "Third-generation owner of Hawthorne Auto Shop, the man who's fixed everything from Mrs. Peterson's vintage Volkswagen to the high school's temperamental riding mower." Harper tore her gaze away from Wes to scan the front row where June Hawthorne sat primly in a bright floral blouse, her white curls bobbing as she beamed up at her grandson with unconcealed delight. The older woman caught Harper staring and gave her a little wave and a wink that made Harper choke slightly on her funnel cake. She leaned toward Lila. "That poor man. His grandmother is the only reason he's up there." "Definitely," Lila agreed. "Though I've heard he built that treehouse for the Parker twins last summer for free after their dad got laid off. So grumpy but secretly decent." "Bidding starts at $25, Vernon announced. "You get dinner at the orchard and a whole evening of, well, whatever you two decide." He waggled his eyebrows suggestively, prompting a glare from Wes that could have wilted the decorative mums. A painful silence descended. Harper winced sympathetically. Despite Wes's undeniable good looks, those broad shoulders and the perpetual 5 o'clock shadow that somehow worked for him, his reputation for being about as approachable as a porcupine seemed to be dampening enthusiasm. $25 for an evening with Briar Hollow's finest mechanic, Vernon tried again. "Those hands can fix anything, ladies." Wes's ears turned crimson as he stared stonily at the horizon. One hand emerged from his pocket to scratch awkwardly at his neck, before disappearing again. $30, called Betsy from the flower shop, who was at least 70 and clearly bidding out of pity. 35, countered Darlene from the post office, who Harper knew for a fact was happily married and just trying to keep the auction moving. Lila nudged Harper again. Come on, miss, I need someone to fix my leaky faucet. Bid on wrench boy. Are you insane? Harper whispered. He'd probably rather drink motor oil than spend an evening making small talk. As if you'd let him get away with not talking, Lila countered. You'd have his life story by dessert. We have $40 from Mrs. Abernathy, Vernon announced. Do I hear 45? Harper rolled her eyes at Lila's expectant expression. Fine, she muttered, lifting her auction paddle in a half-hearted gesture, barely bringing it above shoulder height. But I'm only doing this too? A sudden tickle built in her nose, the telltale burn of autumn pollen making her eyes water. Harper tried to fight it, paddle still awkwardly half-raised, but the sneeze was unstoppable. Ah, achoo. The force of the sneeze sent her arm jerking upward, paddle flying high above her head at the precise moment Vernon scanned the back of the crowd. $50 from Miss Lane, he called out triumphantly. Do I hear 55? Harper froze, funnel cake halfway to her open mouth, a slow-motion horror dawning as she realized what had just happened. Her eyes darted frantically to where Wes stood on stage, his gaze now locked on her with an unreadable expression. Going once. Wait, I didn't mean, Harper started to call out, but her voice was lost in the crowd. Going twice. Lila was no help, already doubled over with laughter at Harper's predicament. Sold. To Miss Harper Lane for $50. The crowd turned in unison, 200 faces swiveling to stare at the back where Harper stood, powdered sugar dusting the front of her pumpkin-colored cardigan, mouth open in protest. Mortification burned through her as she accidentally locked eyes with Wes. His expression had cycled from confusion to dawning horror, and finally settled into a resigned grimace. His jaw worked silently as his gaze flicked from Harper to the front row where Grandma June was clapping with undisguised glee, her entire face alight with satisfaction. I didn't mean to, Harper whispered frantically to Lila, who had tears streaming down her face. You should see your face right now, Lila wheezed between gasping laughs. You look like you just accidentally bought a bridge instead of a date. To make matters worse, Mrs. Abernathy, administrator of the town's infamously active Facebook group, was already typing furiously on her phone, her pink-polished nails flying over the screen. Harper's mind raced ahead to tomorrow's inevitable post. Local teacher snags town's most eligible bachelor in surprise bid, accompanied by some unflattering candid shot of her mid-sneeze. The crowd had begun to disperse, moving toward the next attractions, but Harper remained rooted to the spot, a deer caught in the headlights of her own social disaster. She saw Wes step down from the stage, his shoulders rigid as his grandmother rushed to embrace him. The older woman whispered something that made him shake his head firmly. What do I do now? Harper hissed to Lila, who was finally regaining her composure. Own it, Lila said simply. You just bought yourself a date with the hottest mechanic in 3 counties, however accidentally. And look, she nodded toward where a small cluster of the town's older ladies had gathered. The Grandma Brigade seems thrilled. Sure enough, Mabel Whitaker was urgently whispering to Edith Collins, both of them shooting glances in Harper's direction with undisguised delight. Finally, Harper caught the edge of Mabel's excited whisper. About time those two. Edith responded, her eyes twinkling with the matchmaker's satisfaction. Harper's stomach dropped. Why are they acting like this was inevitable? I've barely spoken 2 words to the man. Lila shrugged. Small-town logic. You're single, he's single, you've both resisted their previous matchmaking attempts. Clearly you're meant for each other. Making a split-second decision, because if there was one thing Harper Lane knew, it was that in Briar Hollow appearances mattered. She straightened her cardigan, brushed the sugar from her front, and tossed her strawberry blonde hair back over her shoulder. Might as well own it, she murmured, summoning a bright smile as she raised her hand in a little wave to the curious onlookers. Across the square, she watched Wes reluctantly detach himself from his grandmother's grip and begin making his way through the crowd toward her. She'd never been this close to him before, and the approach gave her a moment to appreciate the way he moved, purposeful and steady, like a man perpetually sure of his next step, even when that step was clearly the last one he wanted to take. When he looked up and their eyes met again, Harper felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with embarrassment. The setting sun caught the gold flecks in his hazel eyes, and for the briefest moment, she thought she detected a slight upward twitch at the corner of his mouth before his customary scowl resumed. "You didn't have to do that," were his first words when he reached her, voice deeper than she'd expected and tinged with something between resignation and annoyance. "I didn't mean to do that," Harper clarified quickly. "I sneezed. It was an accident." His eyebrows drew together. "An accident," he repeated flatly. "I'm actually allergic to mums," she explained, gesturing vaguely to the decorative flowers lining the walkway. "And possibly to public humiliation, though the jury's still out on that one." Wes studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced back at where his grandmother stood with her friends, all of them watching this exchange with undisguised interest. "Look," he said, lowering his voice and leaning slightly closer. "We can just tell Vernon there was a mistake. You get your $50 back, I get out of this situation." "Oh." Harper's voice sounded small even to her own ears. She was about to agree it was the sensible solution after all, when she caught sight of Mrs. Abernathy's triumphant expression as she held up her phone, clearly having just posted something to the town's Facebook page. Behind her she could hear Lila trying to smother another laugh. "Actually," Harper said, squaring her shoulders, "I think it might be too late for that." She nodded toward the group of older women now huddled together, occasionally shooting delighted glances in their direction. "I think we've just become the talk of Briar Hollow." Wes's gaze followed hers, and she watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. "Fantastic," he muttered. "Just what I needed." Harper bit her lip, suddenly feeling genuinely bad about the situation. "I'm really sorry about this. I know being auctioned off wasn't your idea, and now you're stuck with me because I can't control my sinuses around seasonal flora." The corner of his mouth twitched again, and this time Harper was certain she hadn't imagined it. Not quite a smile, but perhaps the distant cousin of one. "It's fine," he said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "My grandmother's been trying to set me up with half the county for years. At least you seem," he paused, seeming to search for the right word, "normal?" "High praise," Harper said dryly, surprised to find herself bantering with a man she'd previously known only by reputation. "I'll have to put that on my dating profile. Harper Lane, occasionally sneezes, otherwise normal." This time the twitch definitely evolved into something adjacent to a smile, there and gone so quickly she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching his face so carefully. "So," she continued, absently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "what exactly does $50 buy me these days?" "Dinner and—" "Dinner at the orchard," Wes replied automatically. "And I'm guessing your leaky faucet needs fixing?" Harper felt her cheeks flush. "You heard that?" "Small town," he reminded her with a shrug. "Sound carries." Before Harper could respond, June Hawthorne materialized beside them, moving with surprising speed for a woman in her 70s. "Harper dear," she exclaimed, enfolding Harper in a lavender-scented hug. "How wonderful that you won the bidding. Wesley needs to get out more, doesn't he?" Wes closed his eyes briefly. "Grandma?" "We'll have to coordinate schedules," June continued, patting Harper's arm. "I know Wesley would love to take you to the orchard. They have the most divine apple crumble this time of year." "That sounds lovely, Mrs. Hawthorne," Harper said politely, trying not to laugh at Wes's pained expression. "June, please," the older woman insisted. "After all, we're practically family now." "Grandma," Wes said firmly. "It's one dinner. For charity." "Of course, dear," June agreed, with a wink at Harper that suggested she believed nothing of the sort. "Just one dinner for now." Harper caught the eye of several women behind June, all of them beaming with the unmistakable satisfaction of matchmakers who believed their work was succeeding. An awful realization dawned on her. This wasn't just about tonight's auction. Somehow, she and Wes had become the unwitting targets of Briar Hollow's unofficial grandmother's council. "Well," she said brightly, desperate to escape before the situation became even more awkward, "I should probably go help with the pie judging. I promised Mrs. Whitaker I'd be there by 6. "Of course," June said. "Wesley, walk the young lady to the pie tent." "That's really not NEC," Harper began. Fine, Wes cut in, clearly choosing the path of least resistance. As they walked away from June and her friends, Harper could practically feel the weight of 24 pairs of eyes on their backs, cataloging their every move for later discussion. I'm beginning to understand why you looked like you were plotting an escape route up there, Harper murmured. Wes glanced down at her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Welcome to my world, Miss Lane. Harper, she corrected automatically. If we're going to be the subject of town gossip, we might as well be on a first-name basis. Harper, he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his low voice sent another unexpected flutter through her stomach. Oh, she was in trouble.
2. Wrenches and warnings. Wes pulled into the gravel lot of Hawthorne Auto Repair at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than usual. The tires of his old pickup crunched over the loose stones as he cut the engine, sitting for just a moment in the silence. Through the windshield, the morning mist rolled across the pavement like something alive, curling around the corners of the garage. He'd hoped the early start might help him dodge any auction-related commentary, but the knot in his stomach said otherwise. Nothing stayed secret in Briar Hollow for long. Especially not when his grandmother was involved. With a sigh that fogged the cool air, Wes grabbed his thermos and pushed open the truck door. The familiar weight of the keys jangled in his palm as he approached the garage, each step measured and unhurried. The lock clicked open with a well-worn familiarity, and he flipped on the lights, bringing his sanctuary to life. The smell hit him immediately, motor oil metal, the faint hint of the pine-scented cleaner he used on the floors every Friday. After yesterday's public humiliation, the garage felt like the one place where things still made sense. Engines didn't gossip. They didn't tease. They just needed fixing, and fixing things was what Wes did best. He moved through his morning ritual with practiced efficiency. Coffee grounds into the ancient machine that had survived 3 attempts at replacement. Radio tuned to classic rock, volume low enough to think over but loud enough to fill the silence. Work orders arranged on the clipboard, most urgent on top. Everything in its place. Everything under control. While waiting for the coffee to brew, Wes caught his reflection in the office window. The scowl seemed etched into his features, deeper than usual since yesterday's disaster at the festival. Harper Lane's stunned face flashed through his memory, hazel eyes wide with shock when the auctioneer had called her accidental bid. Get it together, he muttered to himself, turning away from his reflection. It'll blow over in a week. The piece lasted exactly 37 minutes. The side door banged open at 7:22 a.m., announcing Mike's arrival with all the subtlety of a car backfiring. Wes dipped deeper under the hood of Mrs. Peterson's Subaru, tightening a bolt with single-minded focus. "Mornin', boss," Mike called out cheerfully, too cheerfully. The 23-year-old part-timer rounded the Subaru with a smirk that spelled trouble. "So, Harper Lane, huh? Never saw that coming." Wes didn't look up, just gave the wrench another forceful turn. The bolt protested with a metallic groan. "You're gonna strip that if you keep at it like that," Mike observed, still hovering. Wes managed only a grunt in response. "Seriously though, the kindergarten teacher? Didn't know she was your type." Mike leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "Cute though. Those freckles." The wrench slipped, and Wes barely missed smashing his knuckles against the engine block. "Don't you have an oil change waiting on the Civic?" Mike raised his hands in surrender, though the grin remained firmly in place. "Sure thing, boss. Just saying, of all the ways to finally join the dating scene, an accidental auction bid is pretty memorable." "We're not dating," Wes growled. "Tell that to Mrs. Abernathy's Facebook post. 43 likes last I checked." Mike ducked into the bay next door before Wes could respond. For the next 2 hours, Wes tried to lose himself in the transmission rebuild on Old Man Granger's Chevy. Lying under the car with grease up to his elbows should have been meditative. Instead, his mind kept drifting to Harper, the way her face had flushed pink beneath those scattered freckles, how she'd nervously tucked a loose strand of strawberry blonde hair behind her ear when everyone turned to stare. He'd seen Harper around town for years, of course. Briar Hollow wasn't big enough to avoid anyone completely. He'd even fixed the wobbly cabinets in her classroom last spring, when the school's regular maintenance guy was out with a broken ankle. She'd been polite, thanked him with one of those sunshine smiles she seemed to hand out to everyone, and that had been that. Except now the entire town thought they were some kind of couple. The bell above the front door jingled at precisely 10:23 a.m. Wes slid out from under the Chevy, wiping his hands on the rag tucked into his belt. His stomach sank when he saw the familiar floral blouse and white curls. Grandma June stood at the counter, holding a wicker basket of what smelled like blueberry muffins. Her face wore the smile that had spelled trouble his entire life, lips curved up just slightly at one corner, eyes twinkling with what she would call helpful mischief. "Wesley, dear?" June chirped, setting the basket down. "I brought breakfast for my favorite bachelor, who's not quite a bachelor anymore." Wes deliberately kept the tool bench between them like a shield. "It was an accident, Grandma." Harper sneezed. End of story. June hummed noncommittally, arranging the muffins on a napkin with practiced care. "Well, accident or not, the whole town is buzzing. Mrs. Abernathy's post has 78 comments already." 78? The number hit like a physical blow. It's been less than 24 hours. Small town big news. June shrugged, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "Have a muffin, dear. I used extra butter." Wes sighed, running a hand through his hair and no doubt leaving a streak of grease. "I need to wash up." In the tiny bathroom, he scrubbed his hands with a harsh orange soap, watching the water run from black to clear. He heard the unmistakable ping of his grandmother's phone through the thin door. "Oh, isn't this sweet?" she called out. "Edith posted a picture of you two from yesterday. Harper looks absolutely darling in that fall sweater." Wes shut off the tap with more force than necessary and grabbed a paper towel. When he emerged, his grandmother had perched on the stool behind the counter, scrolling through her phone with determined enthusiasm. "Listen to this, Harper and Wes finally connecting. I always thought they'd make an adorable couple." "That's from Edith," June read aloud. "Oh, and Marjorie says, about time. Remember when he fixed her classroom cabinets last spring? The sparks were flying." Wes nearly choked on the coffee he'd just picked up. "What sparks?" "I was doing my job." "The camera doesn't lie, dear." June turned her phone around, revealing a photo from the auction. Wes stood stiffly at the edge of the makeshift stage, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Harper, red-faced but smiling gamely, was reaching to shake his hand. The composition made it look like some weird romance novel cover. "Grandma," Wes set his mug down carefully. "This has to stop." Something in his tone must have registered because June's expression shifted from mischievous to earnest. She tucked her phone away and stood, moving around the counter to take his oil-stained hands in hers. "Wesley, would it kill you to play along? Just for a few town events?" Her voice was gentle now, the same tone she'd used whenever he'd been disappointed as a child. "That sweet girl was mortified yesterday. The Fall Harvest Festival Planning Committee meets on Thursday. Take her to dinner beforehand. One date. That's all I'm asking." Wes stared at the ceiling, counting backward from 10. The fluorescent light above the counter had a slight flicker that had annoyed him for months, but he'd never gotten around to fixing it. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I barely know her except as Miss Lane, the teacher who talks with her hands and lets her students make too much noise during recess." He didn't mention how he'd noticed her strawberry blonde hair catching sunlight when she read to her class outside, or the way she seemed to know every kid's name in town. Or how watching her enthusiastically judging the second-grade science fair last year had made him hide a smile behind his coffee cup. "Sometimes the best relationships start with barely knowing someone," June countered, patting his cheek with a papery hand. "Your grandfather asked me to dance before he even knew my name." "That was different," Wes countered, stepping back and grabbing a muffin to keep his hands busy. "That wasn't based on a sneeze and town gossip." The bell above the door jingled again, and Wes froze mid-bite. "Hello." The soft voice carried across the garage, hesitant but somehow musical. Harper Lane stood in the doorway, looking smaller somehow than she had yesterday, clutching a tote bag with what appeared to be cartoon dinosaurs wearing bow ties. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a simple green cardigan over a white blouse. She looked like autumn personified. Grandma June's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Harper, dear. What perfect timing." "Mrs. Hawthorne," Harper greeted with a warm smile that dimmed only slightly when her eyes flicked uncertainly to Wes. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Never, dear. And please, it's June." His grandmother practically vibrated with delight. "I was just leaving, in fact." "You were?" Wes asked, his tone flat with disbelief. "Absolutely. Mabel and I have a standing appointment at the salon." June gathered her purse, moving with the sudden efficiency of a general ordering a tactical retreat. "I'll just leave you two to chat." As she passed Harper, June reached out and patted her arm affectionately. "Welcome to the family, dear." Harper's eyes widened as June disappeared through the door, leaving behind a cloud of floral perfume and an awkward silence punctuated only by the radio's low rumble of Tom Petty singing about free falling. Wes resisted the urge to crawl back under the Chevy. Harper took a deep breath and approached with determined steps, shoulders squared like someone walking into battle. She set her tote bag on the counter with a soft thud. "I brought you coffee," she announced, pulling out a thermos. "And an apology. And a proposition." Wes raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. Her hands were suddenly in motion, punctuating her words as she spoke. "The coffee is because it's early and everyone deserves coffee. The apology is because I absolutely did not mean to bid on you yesterday. I sneezed, which is possibly the most mortifying way to accidentally buy a date with someone. And the proposition." She paused, pulling what looked like homemade cookies wrapped in wax paper from her bag. "The proposition is because I woke up to 16 text messages, and my school principal asking if she should expect a +1 at the faculty dinner next month." Wes almost smiled at the exasperation in her voice. "Almost?" "I think," Harper continued, her hazel eyes locking on his with unexpected firmness despite the nervous way she kept talking with her hands, "we should pretend to date for exactly 3 events, just enough to make it look like we tried, then have a very amicable, drama-free public breakup that won't fuel the gossip mill." She pushed the cookies toward him like a peace offering. "What do you say, Wes? Partners in fake relationship crime?" The proposition hung in the air between them. Wes studied her face, noting the determined set of her jaw beneath the friendly smile. This was clearly a woman used to taking charge of chaotic situations, probably came with the territory of hurting 5-year-olds all day. 3 events, he repeated slowly, testing the weight of the words. Harper nodded, her ponytail bouncing slightly. 3? We do the absolute minimum. Let everyone see we gave it a shot, then quietly go our separate ways by Halloween. No drama, no heartbreak, no townwide Facebook memorial of our failed romance. Wes leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And what exactly would these events entail? Nothing major. Maybe the Harvest Committee meeting this Thursday. The pumpkin carving contest next weekend. Her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the countertop. And probably the autumn dance at the end of the month. That's the main one. If we show up together then quietly drift apart afterward, no one will think twice. The rational part of Wes's brain was already forming an objection. This was exactly the kind of complicated social performance he avoided. But another part, the part that remembered his grandmother's earnest expression and the way the whole town had already latched onto this misunderstanding, was considering the logistics of Harper's plan. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why not just tell everyone it was a mistake and be done with it?" Harper's confident facade cracked just slightly. "Have you met this town? The more we deny it, the more they'll be convinced we're hiding some secret romance. I've lived here 5 years, and I've seen it happen to literally every single person who gets caught in the Briar Hollow rumor mill." She sighed. "Besides, Lila, my best friend, already told everyone at the Tipsy Vine last night that I've had a crush on you for months." "You what?" The coffee mug froze halfway to his mouth. "I don't." Her cheeks flushed pink. "That's Lila making things up. But now half the town thinks I engineered the whole sneeze bid situation as some elaborate scheme to get your attention." Wes set his mug down with a thunk, pressing his fingers to the bridge of his nose. "This town needs a hobby." That startled a laugh out of Harper, a genuine sound that made the corners of her eyes crinkle. "Right. I keep telling them that. I even tried to start a book club, but it devolved into a gossip session by meeting 2. Against his better judgment, Wes felt the corner of his mouth quirk up. He could picture it clearly. Harper with her boundless enthusiasm trying to discuss literature while the town busybodies steered the conversation toward who was seen holding hands at the movie theater. He picked up one of the cookies, inspecting it. "You bake these?" "Is that a roundabout way of asking if they're edible?" Her smile turned wry. "Yes and yes. Baking helps me think, and I did a lot of thinking last night about how to handle this." The cookie was still slightly warm, carrying the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg. Wes took a bite, surprised by the burst of flavor, spicy and sweet with hints of apple. "It's good," he admitted. "High praise," she teased, but there was a hint of relief in her voice. Mike chose that moment to poke his head around the corner. "Boss, the civic's done," but he stopped, eyes widening when he spotted Harper. A grin spread across his face. "Oh, hey there, Miss Lane. Didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not," Wes and Harper said in unison. Mike's grin widened. "Right. I'll just finish up that paperwork." He disappeared back into the bay, but not before giving Wes an exaggerated thumbs up behind Harper's back. Harper bit her lip, fighting a smile. "So, 3 events. Minimal effort. Then we go back to normal life. What do you say? Wes looked at her, really looked at her. The determined set of her shoulders, the practical approach to an absurd situation, the way she was offering him an exit strategy rather than feeding into the town's romantic fantasies. Fine, he said finally. 3 events. But that's it. The relief on her face was immediate and genuine. Perfect. I'll text you the details for Thursday. It's just dinner before the committee meeting, nothing fancy. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a small notepad and pen. I should probably have your number. Wes recited it, watching as she jotted it down in handwriting that somehow managed to be both neat and exuberant. I added cookies to the deal, but they weren't in the original contract, Harper said, tearing off the page and sliding it across the counter to him. Consider them a bonus for agreeing to my slightly unhinged plan. For the first time since the auction, Wes felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. He took the paper with her number, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his pocket. I'm still not wearing a costume to the dance, he warned. Harper's laugh was unexpected and bright. Baby steps, Hawthorne. Let's see if we can survive dinner first.
3. Date night and glitter glue. Harper stared into her closet with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. She'd already changed her outfit 4 times, and her bed resembled a cardigan graveyard. The yellow one was too primary school teacher, the navy blue too formal, and the green made her look like someone trying way too hard to be casual. It's just trivia night, she muttered, running her fingers through her hair. With a fake boyfriend. In front of the entire town. No pressure. Her phone pinged with a text from Lila, wear the burgundy. Trust me. Harper pulled out the soft burgundy sweater she'd been saving for parent-teacher conferences. It was cozy without being frumpy, festive without screaming. I'm trying to coordinate with fall decorations even though I definitely am. She paired it with her favorite jeans and boots, then spent an additional 18 minutes attempting to wrangle her strawberry blonde waves into what Pinterest called an effortlessly tousled topknot. You look like you're trying too hard to look like you're not trying too hard, she told her reflection, then immediately softened. Which is perfect, because that's exactly what you're doing. In her bathroom, she applied a touch of mascara while rehearsing potential conversation starters. So Wes, do you follow professional sports? Too generic. Read any good books lately? Too teacher why? Isn't it funny how the whole town thinks we're a couple now? Too on the nose. Harper groaned and leaned her forehead against the mirror. Just be normal, she whispered to herself. Normal people can do normal conversation without rehearsing. The clock on her nightstand read 6:37 p.m. Wes had actually texted, not called, which somehow felt significant, that he'd pick her up at 6:45 for the 7 p.m. start. That gave her exactly 8 minutes to have a minor anxiety attack and recover. She grabbed her favorite tote bag, the one with little pencils dancing across it that her students had given her last Christmas, and loaded it with her emergency kit, hand sanitizer, mints, 3 different types of pens, and a small pink eraser shaped like a brain that had been her lucky charm through grad school. By 6:43, Harper was perched on her porch swing, leg bouncing, trying to look like someone who often sat peacefully on her porch rather than someone counting the seconds until her fake date arrived. When Wes's dark blue pickup rolled to a stop in front of her cottage, something fluttered in her chest. He stepped out and Harper nearly slid off the swing. The town's grumpy mechanic had cleaned up. His usual 5 o'clock shadow had been trimmed into a neat scruff that defined his jaw rather than obscuring it. Instead of his typical oil-stained t-shirt, he wore a blue and gray flannel with the sleeves rolled to reveal forearms that testified to years of manual labor. His dark hair was still slightly damp, like he'd showered right before coming over. He'd made an effort. For trivia night. For their fake date. For her? Harper realized she was staring when Wes raised an eyebrow. What? He asked, a defensive edge to his voice. Is there something on my face? No. No, you look? Harper fumbled for a word that wouldn't reveal how her pulse had quickened. Clean? Great. Super romantic, Lane. Thanks? Wes's mouth twitched. Ready to go convince a roomful of nosy townspeople we like each other? Harper nodded, adjusting her tote on her shoulder as she made her way down the porch steps. When she reached the bottom, Wes surprised her by opening the passenger door of his truck. The gesture felt so natural it made her chest ache a little. Such service, she teased, trying to lighten the sudden tension she felt. Do all your dates get the royal treatment? Something flickered across his face. Haven't had many lately to compare. The inside of Wes's truck was surprisingly neat, with none of the fast food wrappers or random tools she might have expected. It smelled like pine and something metallic, engine oil maybe, but clean somehow. Like Wes himself. They rode in silence for the first 2 minutes, Harper acutely aware of every breath, every slight movement of Wes's hands on the steering wheel. The quiet pressed against her eardrums until she couldn't take it anymore. So, she ventured. Are you good at trivia? Wes kept his eyes on the road. Depends on the category. Right? Of course. Harper nodded too enthusiastically, watching the trees blur past her window. The silence stretched again, pulling her nerves taut. She fidgeted with the strap of her tote bag, then blurted, I once won a gift certificate to the Buttered Biscuit by knowing all the state capitals backward. She winced immediately. Why had she said that? Who knew state capitals backward? Nobody. Nobody normal? But when she dared to look at Wes, the corner of his mouth had lifted slightly. Backwards how? Like instead of Albany you said Enabla? Harper laughed, relief flooding through her. No, like in reverse alphabetical order. Wyoming, Wisconsin, West Virginia. Ha! Wes's almost smile lingered. That's actually impressive. Weird but impressive. I contain multitudes of useless knowledge, Harper said, relaxing slightly against the seat. It's my superpower. Might come in handy tonight, Wes said, and for a moment, just a flicker of time, it felt almost real. Like they were actually heading to trivia night together, because they wanted to, not because her allergies had terrible timing at an auction. The community hall looked like autumn had exploded inside it. Orange string lights crisscrossed the ceiling, paper leaves dangled from fishing line, and someone had arranged miniature pumpkins on every table. Harper spotted June Hawthorne immediately, holding court near the refreshment table with what Harper had come to think of as the Grandma Mafia. Maybe we can sneak in the back, Harper whispered as they approached the entrance. Wes snorted. In Briar Hollow? Good luck with that. Sure enough, they barely made it 3 steps through the door when Grandma June's voice rang out across the room. Look who's here, everyone. The new couple. Every head swiveled toward them. Harper felt heat crawl up her neck as at least 30 pairs of eyes assessed them, hungry for gossip fodder. She instinctively moved closer to Wes, who stiffened but didn't step away. Just smile, he muttered through barely moving lips. And remember, this was your idea. It was not my idea, Harper hissed back, still smiling rigidly. I sneezed. Details, Wes said, and then to her complete shock, placed his hand lightly against the small of her back to guide her toward their assigned table. The table, covered in a festive orange tablecloth and decorated with those miniature pumpkins, was suspiciously close to what someone had labeled the couple's corner with a hand-drawn sign. Harper caught June winking at the event organizer, and made a mental note to have a serious talk with Wes's grandmother about boundaries. Can I get you some cider? Wes asked, nodding toward the refreshment table. Yes please, Harper said, grateful for a moment to collect herself. She watched him walk away, noticing how several people stopped him for what was clearly gossip disguised as friendly chit-chat. When he returned with 2 steaming cups, Harper was trying to look casual by arranging her pens in size order. Your adoring public seems thrilled, she said, accepting the cider. I think Mrs. Peterson actually pinched your cheek. Don't remind me, Wes grumbled, settling into the chair beside her. Their knees bumped under the small table. Grandma's been busy. Half the town already asked me when we're picking out china patterns. Harper laughed, then jerked in surprise, accidentally knocking her cup. Amber liquid sloshed over the rim and spread across the tablecloth, heading straight for Wes's lap. Before she could grab a napkin, Wes had already swept up a stack and intercepted the spill with practiced efficiency. Sorry, Harper squeaked, mortified. I'm not usually this clumsy. Well, that's a lie, I am, but usually it's more charming and less drenchy. Wes blotted the last of the cider. Smooth move, Lane, he said, but the words lacked any real irritation. If anything, he sounded almost amused. Before Harper could analyze that further, the event coordinator tapped a microphone at the front of the room. Welcome to Briar Hollow's Couples Trivia Night. Grab your partners because tonight we're testing not just your knowledge, but how well you know each other. Harper's stomach dropped. Did you know about this part? She whispered to Wes. Not a clue, he whispered back, looking equally alarmed. First round, general knowledge. Teams, write your names on the answer sheets provided. Harper pulled out her favorite glitter pen, purple with a fluffy pink top, and looked at Wes. Team name? He considered for a moment, then said, The Reluctant Scholars. Harper blinked in surprise. It was perfect, wry, a little self-deprecating, and oddly specific to their situation. I like it, she said softly, writing it in her loopy teacher handwriting. The first several questions were straightforward: capitals of countries, famous inventors, historical dates. To Harper's surprise, Wes knew answers she would have never expected from him. When the question about Hemingway came up, he quietly said, The Old Man and the Sea, before she could even finish reading it. How did you know Hemingway wrote that? She whispered, genuinely impressed. Wes shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. I read, he said simply. Harper found herself watching him more than the question board, reassessing every assumption she'd made about the town's grumpy mechanic. He might not talk much, but when he did speak, his answers revealed depths she hadn't anticipated. He knew about classic cars and 80s rock bands, sure, but also literature, geography, and even a surprising amount about the solar system. And now, the coordinator announced, we move to our partner challenge. Each team will write their answers simultaneously, without conferring. If your answers match, you get double points. Harper uncapped her glitter pen again, but as she went to write, the pen sputtered and then exploded in a spray of sparkly purple ink. It covered their answer sheet and worse, splattered across Wes's hand like some kind of craft store crime scene. Oh my God, Harper gasped, grabbing napkins. I'm so sorry. I'm a walking disaster tonight. She tried to wipe the glitter from his skin, their fingers tangling awkwardly. Wes's hand was warm and calloused against hers, surprisingly gentle despite its strength. He didn't immediately pull away, which Harper counted as a minor miracle. At least now I'll be the shiniest mechanic in town, he deadpanned, examining his glitter-covered hand. Harper couldn't help the laugh that bubbled up, relief mingling with something warmer at the realization that he was actually joking with her. From the next table, Mildred Henderson, one half of a couple married for 52 years, according to the anniversary announcement in last week's Briar Hollow Gazette, leaned over. You two remind me of Harold and me when we were young lovebirds, she said with a delighted smile. How long have you been sweet on each other? Harper froze, mouth half open. They hadn't discussed their backstory. But before she could stammer out some vague answer, Wes surprised her by placing his still sparkly hand over hers on the table. It's been brewing a while, hasn't it, Harper? He said, his voice taking on a warmth she'd never heard before. The casual touch sent heat spreading up her arm and into her cheeks. His hand, so much larger than hers, felt like it belonged there. For a moment, Harper forgot this was all an act. Yes, she managed, her voice only slightly breathless. Quite a while. Throughout the history round, their team, the Reluctant Scholars, pulled steadily ahead. Harper couldn't help bouncing in her chair each time they got an answer right, and once she even grabbed Wes's arm in excitement when they nailed a particularly difficult question about ancient Rome. When she caught Wes watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between amusement and something softer, she quickly released his arm and pretended to be very interested in rearranging their answer sheets. By the final round, they were tied for first place with Lila and her date, a geology professor from the community college. The last question was about local Briar Hollow history, specifically the year the covered bridge on Miller's Creek was built. Harper's mind went blank. She'd only lived in town for 5 years, and while she loved Briar Hollow's quirky charm, the specific dates of local landmarks were beyond her knowledge base. As she sat there panicking, Wes leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. 1902, he whispered. After the flood took out the original. A shiver that had nothing to do with the trivia competition ran down Harper's spine. How did you know that? She asked, pulse quickening at his proximity. My grandfather helped build that bridge, Wes said, a note of quiet pride in his voice that made Harper want to know more about his family, his history, all the stories he kept locked behind that gruff exterior. Despite their correct answer on the final question, they took second place, losing by just 1 point to Lila, who gave Harper an exaggerated wink when she passed them to collect the first-place prize. As the coordinator handed them their modest prize, gift certificates to the buttered biscuit. She insisted on taking a photo for the town Facebook page. Closer together, the woman urged, waving her hand impatiently. You're a couple, not strangers waiting for a bus. Before Harper could decide what to do, Wes hesitantly placed his arm around her waist. The solid warmth of him against her side felt steadying, and Harper found herself leaning slightly into his embrace. For the first time that evening, she didn't have to fake her smile for the camera. Outside the community hall, standing beside his truck in the cool autumn air, Harper clutched their prize certificate and searched for something to say. The night had been surreal, moments of awkwardness interspersed with surprising flashes of connection that felt anything but fake. Well, Wes said, hands in his pockets, that wasn't terrible. In the soft glow of the street lamp, Harper could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his perpetual 5 o'clock shadow emphasized rather than hid the strong line of his jaw. There was silver glitter still caught in the rolled cuff of his flannel. Next time I promise not to cover you in glitter, she said, then realized she'd assumed there would be a next time. Heat crept into her cheeks. I mean, if there is a next time. For this thing we're doing. She was babbling, but before she could backpedal further, Wes looked at her with unexpected softness. I don't know, he said quietly, reaching out to brush something from her cheek. It might be growing on me. His thumb grazed her skin so lightly she might have imagined it, but the brief touch left her speechless as she watched him walk around to the driver's side of his truck. The whole ride home, Harper sat quietly, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath in the small cab. When they pulled up to her cottage, Wes walked her to her door, another surprise in an evening full of them. Thanks for tonight, she said, fiddling with her keys. You make a surprisingly good fake date. The corner of Wes's mouth lifted. You're not so bad yourself, Lane. He hesitated, then added, get some rest. I have a feeling Grandma's just getting started with her plans for us. As his truck pulled away, Harper leaned against her door, certificate still clutched in her hand, trying to remember this was all pretend. The flutter in her chest when he touched her cheek, the warmth that spread through her when he'd wrapped his arm around her waist, that was just good acting. Wasn't it?
4. Quiet fixes. Wes twisted another turn of his wrench, securing the oil filter with practiced precision. The rest of the shop had gone quiet hours ago. Mike and the other mechanics cleared out by 6, leaving only the faint buzz of the overhead lights and the occasional ping of cooling metal. He should have left too, should have been home with a beer and whatever game was on. Instead, he was still here. Still working. And still finding random bits of glitter on his shirt. A sparkle caught his eye as he reached for a rag. Wes frowned, plucking at a stubborn fleck of gold that clung to his cuff like it had signed a lease. That damn glitter pen. The memory of Harper's horrified expression when it exploded mid-trivia match played across his mind, followed immediately by the way she'd laughed it off. She'd somehow managed to get most of it on herself, but apparently glitter was just as stubborn as she was. Just like the memory of her. The clock on the wall read 11:17. Wes sighed, finally admitting defeat on both the car and his attempts to not think about trivia night. After locking up the garage, he climbed into his truck, the bench seat stretching empty beside him. For some reason, the truck felt bigger tonight. Emptier. His house wasn't much better. Wes flicked on lights as he moved through the rooms, but they did little to dispel the quiet. He dropped onto the couch, remote in hand, but didn't turn on the TV. Instead, he found himself staring at his shirt cuff again, at the tiny flecks of gold that winked under the lamplight. Harper had smelled like cinnamon. Not the fake candle shop kind, the real thing, like she'd been baking. When they'd squeezed together for that ridiculous photo Grandma June insisted on taking, she'd fit against his side like she belonged there, warm and solid despite being nearly a foot shorter. And when their team had gotten that impossible literature question right, some obscure author nobody should know, she'd grabbed his arm and laughed with genuine delight, as if his knowing the answer made him some kind of hero. Wes rubbed a hand over his face. This was getting ridiculous. It was one night of pretend, that's all. Just enough to keep the town gossip satisfied and Grandma June off his back. The fact that it had been, not terrible, didn't change anything. He went to bed with the TV on, more for the noise than the entertainment. His house had never seemed particularly quiet before. Now it felt like a vacuum, like something was missing that should be there. It took him an embarrassingly long time to fall asleep. Wes hadn't intended to drive past Harper's house the next morning. It wasn't even on his way to the garage. But he found himself turning down Maple Street anyway, slowing as he approached the small blue Craftsman with the cheerful yellow door. He was just making sure Grandma June wasn't lurking around with more muffins or matchmaking schemes. That's all. He just decided to keep driving when the front door flew open, and Harper burst out like she was being chased. Arms loaded with what looked like 3 tote bags, a stack of colorful folders, and a poster tube, she rushed down the porch steps with the frantic energy of someone running late. The second-to-last step shifted visibly as her foot hit it. Harper wobbled, performing an awkward hop-skip to regain her balance without dropping anything. Wes's hand was already on the door handle when he caught himself. She hadn't fallen. She was fine. And from the practiced way she recovered, this clearly wasn't the first time that step had caused problems. He watched as she somehow managed to unlock her car door while still balancing everything, tossed it all into the passenger seat, and drove off, apparently unaware of his presence. Wes sat there a moment longer, frowning at her porch. The step was completely separated from the support beam, hanging on by what looked like a single nail and stubbornness. "Accident waiting to happen," he muttered, shifting back into drive. "You gonna stare at that diagram all day, or you wanna maybe finish Mrs. Peterson's radiator flush before she calls again?" Wes looked up, caught off guard by Mike's knowing grin. The lanky mechanic leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "Just thinking through a project," Wes said, casually flipping his notepad closed. "Aha. And does this project have strawberry blonde hair and a laugh that carries across the whole damn community hall?" Wes shot him a look that had sent lesser men running. "It's a porch step repair." Mike's eyebrows climbed higher. "Harper Lane's porch step. How do you—" Wes cut himself off, silently cursing small towns and their collective nosiness. "This place, I swear to God. My wife's in Harper's book club. Everyone knows about that death trap of a step. Lindsay says Harper's been meaning to fix it for months but keeps spending her home repair fund on classroom supplies instead." Mike shrugged. "Just saying?" Wes grunted, turning back to the radiator. "The Peterson car'll be done in 20. "Whatever you say, boss." Mike pushed off the workbench. "By the way, when you do go to fix it, use cedar. More expensive, but it'll last through our winters." "I didn't say." Right. My mistake." Mike's knowing grin didn't fade as he walked away, whistling what sounded suspiciously like "Love is in the Air." Wes managed to focus for the next few hours, methodically working through the day's jobs. But between tasks, he found himself returning to the notepad, refining measurements, calculating materials. By mid-afternoon, he had a complete plan sketched out. Just being thorough, he told himself. Just being a good neighbor. By closing time, he had the list memorized. Planning a big project. Wes looked up from the lumber he'd been inspecting for the last 5 minutes. Ted Blanchard, owner of Blanchard's Hardware for the last 30 years, wasn't even trying to hide his curiosity. "Just a porch repair," Wes said flatly. "Cedar's a premium choice for just a repair job," Ted noted, gesturing to Wes's cart. "Weather-sealed, galvanized hardware too. You're not messing around." Wes shrugged. "Do it right or don't do it." Ted nodded sagely. "You know, a fair few folks have come through offering to fix Harper's porch. She keeps turning them down. Says she'll get to it herself someday." A strange feeling twisted in Wes's gut. I'm not." "Relax, son. I'm just making conversation." Ted's expression might have passed for innocent if not for the twinkle in his eyes. "Need any help loading this up?" "I've got it," Wes said, more gruffly than necessary. Ted rang up the materials while Wes pointedly ignored the man's barely contained amusement. When the total came up, Wes handed over his credit card without comment. The price didn't matter. This wasn't about. Haven't seen a man go to these lengths for a lady since Roger Whitman re-shingled Elaine's entire roof back in '86. Ted chuckled, passing the receipt. "Course they've been married 37 years now, so I guess it worked out." Wes pocketed the receipt. "It's just a step." "Sure thing. Just a step." Wes parked his truck a block away from Harper's house, killing the headlights. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:17 p.m., late enough that most of Briar Hollow was tucked into bed, early enough that he shouldn't run into any deputies on small-town patrol. He sat for a moment, second-guessing his plan. This was ridiculous. It was just a broken step. Maybe he should? The mental image of Harper tripping, arms full, her practiced recovery, intruded again. Wes sighed, reached for his toolbox, and got out of the truck. The October air carried a crisp edge, leaves crunching under his boots as he unloaded the lumber. He had everything perfectly measured, pre-cut at the hardware store, to minimize noise. The less time spent sawing in the middle of the night, the better. As he approached Harper's house, a warm glow from her front window caught his attention. She was still up. Great. Wes hesitated, weighing his options. He could come back another night. Or wait until she went to sleep. Or, like a normal person, just knock and offer to fix it. But that would require explanations. Questions. Potentially Grandma June finding out he'd been at Harper's house after dark, which would lead to an entire new level of interference he wasn't prepared to handle. No, better to just get it done. He set his tools down carefully at the base of the steps. The second-to-last step was worse than he'd initially thought. Completely detached on one side, the old nail rusted through. It was a wonder Harper hadn't broken an ankle. Working as quietly as possible, Wes pried away the broken board. Behind her curtains he caught the shadow of movement, Harper passing through her living room. The faint sound of singing drifted through the window. Something upbeat he didn't recognize, her voice carrying unexpected warmth even through glass and distance. He found himself pausing to listen before catching himself. Not why he was here. Focus on the steps. Just the steps. The repair itself wasn't complicated, but Wes found himself being extra thorough, reinforcing not just the broken step but the ones above and below it too. Might as well do it right while he was here. He carefully measured each replacement board, making sure the fit was exact, the stain matching the existing woodwork. He hammered as quietly as humanly possible, wincing at each tap. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air, partly from concentration, partly from the constant awareness of Harper just inside. At one point her silhouette appeared at the window, and Wes froze mid-motion, half convinced she'd spot him and call the police. But the curtain fell back into place moments later, and he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The job took twice as long as it should have, but finally Wes straightened, surveying his work with critical eyes. The new boards blended perfectly with the old, the steps now solid and even. He tested each one with his full weight, bouncing slightly to ensure they'd hold. Rock solid. Gathering his tools, Wes hesitated at the top of the steps. Harper's door was just a few feet away, a bright welcome mat at the threshold. "Come in, we're awesome," it proclaimed in bold letters, accompanied by a cartoon dinosaur wearing oversized glasses. Something tugged at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile but close. Of course she would have a welcome mat like that. Probably thought it was hilarious. Probably figured it would make visitors smile. He was still looking at it when the porch light stuttered. Wes froze, suddenly aware of how this would look, a man lurking on her porch after midnight. He quickly retreated down the newly repaired steps, tools in hand, and disappeared into the darkness before anyone could spot him. "You fixed my steps." Wes straightened up from the engine he'd been rebuilding, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He'd been so focused on the job he hadn't heard Harper approach. Now she stood just a few feet away, holding 2 coffee cups, wearing a navy blue cardigan with tiny apples embroidered along the collar. Her expression was unreadable, not angry exactly, but intense in a way that made something in his chest tighten. "They needed fixing," he said, accepting the coffee she held out. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and he firmly ignored the way his pulse jumped. Harper didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between them, surprisingly comfortable despite the intensity of her gaze. Finally she spoke. "Thank you." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. "My second graders left class early today, because we could all walk down those steps together instead of single file." Wes shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. She reached into her ever-present tote bag, pulling out her phone. "We track acts of kindness in my classroom. Today we did a special lesson on unexpected kindnesses." She turned the screen toward him. On it was a photo of a brightly colored chart covered in student names and gold star stickers. "Kindness Tracker," the header read in rainbow letters. "Yours was our example," she said quietly. "Anonymous Midnight Porch Repair." Wes shifted his weight, unsure how to respond. "How did you know it was me?" "The steps match the color of my porch exactly. Only someone who cares about details would do that." She smiled, a small knowing thing that reached her eyes. "Plus there's a little pencil mark on the second step, like someone was measuring. You had graphite on your hands at trivia night too." Of course she'd noticed that. "I should get going. I've got book club tonight, and if I'm late Marge will give away my spot on the good couch." Harper backed up a step, then hesitated. "We're doing another date thing next week, right? The harvest dinner at the community hall." Wes found himself nodding before he could think too much about it. "Yeah. Grandma June already bought the tickets." "Great. I mean good, that's good. for our cover story." Her smile brightened, and Wes felt something in his chest loosen. "See you then?" As she turned to leave, a small piece of paper fluttered from her bag to the garage floor. Wes bent to retrieve it, intending to call after her, but she was already halfway to her car, a cheerful blur of color and energy. He glanced down at the paper in his hand. It was a folded sheet of construction paper, creased with careful precision. When he opened it, he found a crayon drawing of what appeared to be him, represented by a stick figure with a scribbled beard and what might have been a wrench. Next to him stood another figure with a wild mass of orange-yellow hair and a smile that took up half its face. "Mr. Wes and Ms. Lane" was written in wobbly letters at the bottom. Wes stared at it longer than he should have. He could easily catch up to Harper, return the drawing. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, he carefully refolded it along its original creases and tucked it into his shirt pocket. The paper settled there, a small weight against his heart that he tried and failed to ignore as he turned back to his work.
5. The Maze That Binds U.S. Harper arrived at the Fall Harvest Festival grounds, clutching her third coffee of the day, the cardboard cup warming her fingers against the crisp autumn morning. She picked her way through half-assembled booths, dodging volunteers who wrestled with banner poles and string lights. The air smelled like kettle corn and cinnamon, with undertones of hay and wood smoke that screamed fall in a way that made her heart happy despite the early hour. She'd volunteered for ticket sales, a mindless task where she could caffeinate in peace while watching the festival come to life. Last night she'd stayed up too late making prize ribbons for her students' harvest drawings, and the lack of sleep left her feeling slightly fuzzy around the edges. "Harper dear. Such perfect timing." The familiar voice cut through her caffeine-deprived haze. Harper turned to see Grandma June waving enthusiastically from beside the Lover's Lane corn maze entrance, clipboard clutched to her chest like a battle shield. The older woman wore a burnt orange cardigan with tiny embroidered leaves, her white curls bouncing with each excited gesture. Harper plastered on her best teacher smile and made her way over. "Good morning, Ms. June. The decorations look amazing this year." "Never mind that," June said, tapping her clipboard with alarming efficiency. "We have an emergency. The Wilkerson twins have the flu, both of them, and they were supposed to run the maze today." "Oh, that's too bad," Harper said, already sensing where this was heading with the same dread as spotting a kindergartner about to sneeze directly in your face. "I'm sure someone will. You and Wesley can do it." June beamed as if bestowing a tremendous gift. "I don't think. It's all settled. The festival committee already approved it." June's eyes sparkled with matchmaking mischief. "You two make such a darling couple. Everyone's been saying so." Before Harper could protest, she spotted a familiar broad-shouldered figure approaching from behind June. Wes appeared carrying a box of flashlights, his expression caught somewhere between resignation and annoyance. Their eyes met over his grandmother's head, and Harper's stomach did that inconvenient flip it had been doing lately whenever she saw him. "Morning," he said, the word clipped and short, but his eyes lingered on her face. "Hi," Harper replied, suddenly conscious of her rain boots, old jeans, and the coffee stain on her sweater sleeve. "Isn't this perfect?" June clapped her hands. "The maze doesn't open for another hour, so you two have plenty of time to get settled." She thrust her clipboard at Harper. "Here's the volunteer instruction sheet. The maze tickets are in the green lockbox under the counter." Before either of them could object, June was patting Wes's cheek and hurrying away, her floral scarf fluttering behind her like a victory banner. "Your grandmother should work for the CIA," Harper said, watching June efficiently disappear into the crowd. "Special Division for Covert Operations involving corn and grandchildren." The corner of Wes's mouth twitched. She's been perfecting her techniques for years. Harper followed him to the maze entrance booth, a wooden structure festooned with twinkling lights, surprisingly realistic silk autumn leaves, and Harper winced, cheesy heart-shaped signs proclaiming "Fall in Love at Lover's Lane." Inside the small booth, Wes set down the box and withdrew 2 red bandanas. "Apparently we're supposed to hand these to each couple," he said, holding them up with obvious disdain. Harper bit back a smile at his expression. "Could be worse. Last year it was matching flower crowns." "Flower?" he broke off, shaking his head. "I don't even want to know." They busied themselves arranging supplies, shoulders occasionally brushing in the close quarters. Harper tried not to notice how his flannel shirt smelled like cedar and motor oil, or how the morning light caught his dark lashes as he concentrated on testing flashlights. A leaf had caught in his dark hair, probably from carrying supplies through the festival grounds. Without thinking, Harper reached up and plucked it free, her fingers grazing the warm skin at his temple. Wes went completely still beneath her touch. "Leaf," she explained, suddenly breathless at their proximity. The single word came out embarrassingly husky. He cleared his throat and stepped back, busying himself with organizing flashlights into neat rows. "Thanks." By 10 o'clock, they'd established an awkward rhythm. Harper greeted customers with her sunniest smile, while Wes handed out maps and flashlights with minimal conversation but unfailing efficiency. "You're a natural with the kids," Harper remarked during a lull, watching him demonstrate how to use a flashlight to a wide-eyed toddler. Wes shrugged. "Engines, kids? Both just need clear instructions and no sudden movements." "Did you just compare children to carburetors?" "Carburetors are more predictable." But he smiled, a quick rare flash that transformed his face and sent Harper's heart into a ridiculous flutter. Around noon, dark clouds rolled in unexpectedly, swallowing the blue sky in a matter of minutes. Harper watched anxiously while explaining the maze rules to a giggling teenage couple, who were clearly more interested in the lovers aspect than the maze part. "Remember, stay on the paths," Harper instructed, handing over bandanas. "If you get lost, just call out. We'll find you." Beside her, Wes studied the approaching clouds, his brow furrowed. "Think it'll hold off?" she asked. "Not a chance," he responded just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, landing with audible plops on the booth's canvas roof. Within minutes, the gentle shower intensified into a proper downpour. Wind whipped through the festival grounds, knocking over unattended cups and sending napkins skittering across tables. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "We should close up," Wes said, already collecting flashlights as the remaining maze-goers emerged, laughing and drenched. Harper nodded, struggling to secure the cash box as wind tugged at the papers on the counter. "I'll check the maze for stragglers," she called over her shoulder, ducking into the towering cornrows without waiting for his response. The maze transformed in the rain, golden stalks swaying hypnotically, raindrops catching what little sunlight filtered through the dark clouds. The earth quickly turned to mud, squelching beneath Harper's boots as she hurried through the first turn. "Hello," she called. "Anyone still in here?" "Maze is closing due to weather." Only the pattering rain answered. Harper pushed deeper, her hair growing increasingly damp despite her hurried pace. The paths, which had seemed so clearly defined earlier, now twisted confusingly in the dim storm light. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with Wes's solid chest. "You shouldn't be in here alone," he said, rain dripping from his hair onto his already soaked flannel. His expression held a mixture of irritation and concern that made something warm unfurl in Harper's chest. She opened her mouth to argue that she was perfectly capable of checking a maze designed for children, but a magnificent crack of thunder interrupted her. They both jumped, and Wes instinctively stepped closer, his hand finding her elbow. "We need to get out," he said, his voice low as he guided her forward. Harper nodded, suddenly aware of how the rain had plastered her clothes to her skin and turned her carefully braided hair into a heavy dripping rope. "This way, I think," she said, pointing toward what looked like a wider path. 3 turns later, the growing unease in Harper's stomach confirmed her suspicion. They were going deeper into the maze, not toward the exit. The rain fell in sheets now, obscuring visibility beyond a few feet. "I think we're lost," she said, half laughing in disbelief. "I swear I'm usually better with directions than this." Wes ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back from his forehead. A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "The mechanic and the teacher, defeated by corn. The town will never let us live this down." He shook his head. "June will be insufferable." "Listen," Harper said, holding up a finger. "Do you hear that?" They stood still, rain drumming around them, until they caught the faint sound of music and voices from the festival, but it seemed to come from all directions at once, the sound bouncing confusingly off the corn walls. Harper stepped forward, squinting through the downpour at what she thought might be a shortcut, but her boot hit a particularly slick patch of mud. Her foot slid out from under her, arms windmilling as she lost balance. Wes caught her with surprising speed, strong hands gripping her waist. The sudden steadiness of his touch contrasted sharply with her racing pulse, as she found herself pulled against his chest. Rain streamed down his face as he looked down at her, still holding on, his thumbs pressing gently into her sides. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. Harper nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Water dripped from her eyelashes, and she blinked it away, acutely aware of how his hands spanned her waist and how her own had landed on his chest, feeling the solid warmth beneath his soaked shirt. "We should," she started, then faltered as his gaze dropped briefly to her lips. "Find shelter," he finished, releasing her waist but keeping one hand at her elbow. They found it under an overhang of particularly tall corn stalks that had bowed together from the weight of the rain, creating a makeshift canopy. It wasn't much, but it broke the worst of the downpour. Harper wrung water from her braid, shivering slightly despite the lingering warmth of the day. Wes stood at the edge of their shelter, hands in his pockets, watching the rain. His profile was sharp against the stormy light, jaw tense, shoulders hunched slightly against the damp. Something about his solitary stance stirred a question that had been lingering in Harper's mind. "Why are you always alone, Wes?" she asked suddenly, the intimate setting making her brave. "I mean, before all this," she gestured between them, water droplets flying from her fingers, "fake dating chaos?" He stiffened, looking away. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer at all. "Easier that way," he finally said, but something in his expression, a flicker of something raw before his features settled back into their usual stoicism, made Harper think there was more. "Is it though?" she pressed gently. "Easier?" Wes turned to face her fully, rainwater dripping from his hair onto his shoulders. "No complications. No expectations." He shrugged, the gesture oddly vulnerable. "Nobody gets disappointed." "Who would be disappointed in you?" Harper asked, genuinely confused. He gave a short laugh that contained no humor. "Give it time." "That's not fair," she said, stepping closer. "To me or to yourself?" A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds then, illuminating raindrops on corn tassels and catching golden flecks in Wes's hazel eyes. The sudden light transformed their little sanctuary, casting everything in a warm amber glow that felt separate from the rest of the world. "You know what I think?" Harper said, heart pounding in her throat. "I think you got comfortable being the town's Mr. Fix-It, the guy who needs nothing and wants nothing. But that's not the real you." Wes's jaw tightened. "You don't know me, Harper." "Don't I?" She stepped closer, rainwater squishing in her boots. "I've seen how you fixed Mrs. Patterson's door when she couldn't afford to call a carpenter. How you stock your waiting room with coloring books for kids. How you remembered that Sammy in my class is allergic to peanuts, and made sure there were none in the Halloween treats you brought." Harper found herself leaning toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "I've seen you, Wes Hawthorne." His gaze dropped to her lips, the air between them suddenly charged with possibility. For one breathless moment, Harper thought he might kiss her, could see the consideration of it in the slight parting of his lips, feel it in the way the space between them seemed to compress into nothing but heat and want. But then voices called out nearby, festival workers searching for them. "Wes? Harper? You folks still out here?" Wes stepped back, the moment broken, leaving Harper wondering if she imagined the longing in his eyes or if it mirrored her own very real feelings. "Over here," he called, voice steady despite the intensity that had hung between them seconds earlier. As they followed the rescuers out of the maze, Harper couldn't help noticing that Wes stayed close beside her, his hand occasionally brushing against hers, as if he couldn't quite bring himself to let her navigate the mud alone. Each point of contact sent sparks through her fingertips, little reminders of that untaken kiss hanging between them like the afterimage of lightning. This was supposed to be fake, she reminded herself sternly. But with each passing day, it felt increasingly dangerously real.
6. The workshop glow. Wes wiped down the workbench for the third time, running the cloth over a surface already spotless enough to perform surgery on. He checked his watch, 10:37 p.m. Every minute that ticked by made him question his sanity. Who invites someone to a garage this late just to show off a motorcycle? He stepped back, taking in the gleaming 1975 Triumph that he'd spent the better part of a year restoring in stolen moments between actual paid jobs. The chrome caught the harsh fluorescent light, the deep midnight blue tank so polished he could see his reflection. It had been his dad's pride and joy, sitting under a tarp in the back of the garage for nearly a decade after his death. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "Harper. On my way. Had to finish report cards first. Bringing cookies." Wes stared at the exclamation points, a knot forming in his stomach. How did she manage to convey so much energy through text? And why did it make him feel like he'd stuck a finger in an electrical socket? He tucked the phone away and grabbed a wrench he didn't need, adjusting a bolt that was already perfectly tight. The familiar weight in his hand steadied him. This was stupid. It was just Harper, the woman who'd accidentally bought him at auction, who'd spilled cider down his shirt at trivia night, who looked at his grumpiness like it was an adorable puppy trick instead of the armor he'd spent years perfecting. The woman he'd almost kissed in that ridiculous corn maze. Wes set the wrench down with more force than necessary. He'd never invited anyone to see his personal projects before. The guys at the garage knew not to touch anything under the tarp in the back. Even Grandma June respected the boundary, though she often asked how that old death trap was coming along. This motorcycle wasn't just metal and rubber and paint. It was his dad teaching him to rebuild an engine at 14, ruffling his hair when he correctly diagnosed a timing problem. It was late nights with classic rock playing too loud, the smell of grease and metal, and the coffee his dad drank black. It was the last real connection he had to the man who taught him everything about machines and nothing about how to navigate life without him. And he was about to show it to Harper Lane, of all people. A sweep of headlights cut through the windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Wes took a deep breath, crossed to the bay door, and hit the button to roll it up. Harper's ancient blue hatchback, a vehicle he'd mentally diagnosed with at least 7 potentially catastrophic issues, pulled up outside. She stepped out, and Wes felt that same electrical current run through him. Her hair was down, strawberry blonde waves falling past her shoulders instead of pulled into her usual chaotic topknot. She wore a chunky cream cardigan over a simple blue t-shirt, with jeans and those ridiculous fuzzy boots she insisted were perfectly appropriate footwear. She held up a plastic container like it was a peace offering. "Sorry I'm late. These are still warm though." "You're fine," Wes said, stepping back to let her in. "Not like I've got anywhere else to be." Harper walked in and immediately stopped, her eyes going wide as she spotted the motorcycle. "Oh my God, Wes, you built this?" She moved toward it like someone approaching a work of art, circling it slowly. Her fingers traced reverently over the polished chrome handlebars, following the curve of the fuel tank. Wes found himself watching her hands, the chipped blue nail polish, the small infinity symbol tattooed on her wrist that he'd never asked about. "Restored it," he corrected quietly. "It was my dad's." "It's beautiful," she murmured, bending slightly to examine the engine. "How long have you been working on it?" "About a year. Off and on." "And you just finished it?" Wes nodded, suddenly self-conscious under her admiring gaze. "Yesterday. And I'm the first person to see it." She looked up at him, her expression shifting to something he couldn't quite read. "Besides me, yeah. Wesley Hawthorne." She straightened up, placing a hand over her heart dramatically. "I'm touched. Truly touched." He rolled his eyes but couldn't stop the small smile tugging at his mouth. "Don't make it weird. You brought food, I'm showing you a motorcycle. Even trade." "Oh. Right." She held up the container. "I comfort bake when I'm doing report cards. The kids' parents might murder me when they see how much TV time their little angels have been losing to cell phone usage, so I figured I needed cookies for survival." "Come on," Wes said, nodding toward the small break room off the main garage. "I made coffee." Harper followed him into the cramped space that contained little more than a worn leather couch, a mini fridge, a coffee maker, and a small table. Not exactly the Ritz, but it was where he spent most of his lunch breaks. "This is cozy," she said, plopping down on the couch and immediately kicking off her ridiculous boots. She tucked her feet under her, like she'd been hanging out in his space for years, prying open the cookie container. "I've always wondered where you hide when Mrs. Abernathy comes in to tell you about her cat's digestive issues." Wes poured coffee into 2 mugs, the chipped one with the Hawthorne Auto logo for him, and the least offensive novelty mug he could find for her, which happened to say "World's Okayest Mechanic." "I don't hide," he muttered, handing her the mug. She accepted the coffee with a knowing smirk. "That's why you practically dive under cars when you see her coming." Wes sat down on the other end of the couch, reaching for a cookie. It was still warm, the chocolate chips melting slightly against his fingers. "That's called self-preservation. Last time she cornered me, I heard about Mitten's hairball situation for 45 minutes. Harper laughed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "So why the midnight unveiling? Not that I'm complaining about warm cookies and motorcycle eye candy, but you know normal people do this sort of thing at brunch." Wes took a bite of cookie to buy himself time. How could he explain that he'd wanted her specifically to see the finished project? That somewhere between fixing her porch step and getting lost in that damn corn maze, her opinion had started to matter. Seemed like something you'd appreciate, he finally managed. Harper tilted her head, studying him with those hazel eyes that somehow always seemed to see more than he wanted to show. Because I'm such a motorcycle expert. Because you get enthusiastic about things, he admitted. It's nice when someone appreciates the work you put into something. Her smile softened. Well, it's incredible, Wes. Truly. Your dad would be proud. Something in his chest tightened and released. He looked down at his coffee. Thanks. So, Harper said, clearly sensing his discomfort and changing the subject, want to hear about the creative spelling my second graders used on their dinosaur reports. Zach Miller is convinced there was a dinosaur called a Megasaurus, which honestly sounds like something that should exist. Wes settled back against the couch, finding himself genuinely interested. How bad could it be? Oh, you innocent man. She grinned, launching into stories about her students with such animation that Wes couldn't help but be drawn in. He found himself smiling more than he had in months, as she described a debate over whether pterodactyls should count as dinosaurs that had apparently ended with a small riot in the classroom. When she got to the part where one student had insisted T-Rexes were vegetarians because my dad said so, she laughed hard enough to snort, then immediately covered her mouth in embarrassment. Something shifted in his chest, a warm, unfamiliar sensation. Harper Lane was ridiculous and chaotic and couldn't keep houseplants alive, but she cared so deeply about her kids that she'd spent her Friday night grading papers. She baked cookies when she was stressed but brought them to share. She treated his grumpiness like a challenge rather than a warning. God, sorry, she said, still covering her mouth. That was so attractive. Please erase that from your memory. Not a chance, he replied, surprised by the warmth in his voice. It's cute. Harper blinked at him, pink creeping into her cheeks. That might be the first compliment you've ever given me, Hawthorne. Are you feeling okay? Should I check for a fever? She reached over as if to feel his forehead, and he caught her wrist reflexively. The contact sent a jolt through him, her skin warm under his fingers, her pulse quick. Neither of them moved for a long moment. I'm fine, he said, finally releasing her. I don't know. Tonight's different. Because of the motorcycle. Or the late night. Or? Because it's just us, Wes admitted. No audience. No town watching. No pretending. Harper's expression shifted, growing more thoughtful. She took a sip of her coffee. So what did you want to be when you grew up? Before you became the automotive wizard of Briar Hollow. The sudden topic changed through him, but he was grateful for it. Mechanic, same as my dad. Never wanted to be anything else. Come on, she nudged his knee with her foot. You never had a ridiculous childhood dream? Astronaut. Rock star. Professional cookie taster? Motorcycle racer, he confessed. For about 2 weeks when I was 10. That I can see, she nodded, gesturing toward the garage. Did you race your dad's bike? No, he wouldn't let me near it until I was 16. But Wes hesitated, then figured he might as well continue. After high school, I was going to take that bike cross-country. Dad and I were planning the route when he got sick. Harper's smile faded. Oh, Wes. I'm sorry. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the softness in her voice. It was a long time ago. What stopped you from going after he was gone? Wes stared into his coffee, suddenly very interested in the way the light reflected off the dark surface. Dad got sick. Then he was gone. The garage needed someone. Dream shade. And Grandma June had already lost her son, Harper added quietly. She needed you close. Something like that. He glanced up at her. What about you? Always wanted to shape young minds. Actually, she tucked her hair behind her ear again, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. I wanted to write children's books. Illustrate them too. I was that kid who was always doodling in notebooks when I should have been paying attention in math class. Why didn't you? Oh, the usual. Student loans, practicality, fear of starving. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Teaching was a way to work with kids and still be creative, just within certain parameters. Do you still draw? Sometimes, she admitted. I have a whole sketchbook of this hippo character named Herbert, who's afraid of water. My first graders seem to like him. Wes nodded toward the motorcycle in the garage. And now? Still no desire to go. On that trip, I mean. Harper's expression grew contemplative. I think about it sometimes. But I love my kids, my students I mean. And Briar Hollow's become home in a way I didn't expect. She looked at him directly. What about you? Still want to take that cross-country ride? Grandma June needs me, he said automatically, then after a pause added more honestly, and maybe I was scared of wanting more. Wesley Hawthorne, afraid? I don't believe it, Harper teased gently, but her eyes remained serious. The man who faces down engine fires and Mrs. Peterson's ancient Subaru. She reached for his hand, and to his surprise he didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, her hand small but warm in his. Her thumb traced circles on his palm, sending electricity up his arm. Their knees touched, neither moving away. After Dad died, it seemed safer to keep things contained. Predictable, Wes said, gesturing vaguely around the garage with his free hand. This place doesn't surprise you. People do. Harper nodded slowly. Like accidentally buying a grumpy mechanic at auction. A smile tugged at his mouth. Exactly like that. The overhead light flickered, the ancient wiring in the garage showing its age, casting shadows across Harper's face. In the momentary dimness, Wes found himself drawing closer, courage borrowed from the semi-darkness. This wasn't supposed to be real, he murmured, close enough now to count the freckles across her nose. Harper's breath caught. Wasn't it? She whispered back. The kiss happened slowly, deliberately, none of the frantic energy he'd expected. His hand cupped her cheek, her fingers curled into his shirt. It was soft, almost questioning at first, then deepening with a shared sigh. Harper tasted like chocolate chips and possibility, and Wes felt something long dormant stirring in his chest. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads touching, neither spoke immediately. The line between pretend and real had disappeared completely, and Wes wasn't sure he wanted to find it again.
7. Signs and signals. Harper dropped her stack of spelling tests onto her desk and dug through her tote bag for her emergency stash of red pens. After 3 minutes of searching, she abandoned all hope. Clearly, the pen-eating goblins of Briar Hollow Elementary had claimed another victim. Sighing, she glanced at her phone, 6:42 a.m. If she hurried, she could swing by the buttered biscuit before first bell. The late-night text conversation with Wes had left her bleary-eyed but oddly energized. What had started as a panicked message about her car making a sound like angry dolphins trapped in the engine had somehow morphed into a 3-hour chat about everything from the merits of pineapple on pizza. She was pro, he was horrified, to childhood treehouse disasters. By the time Wes had typed, "You should get some sleep, Sparky," at 1:13 a.m., Harper had been curled up on her couch with a stupid smile on her face, wholly unconcerned about her car's mysterious ailment. She'd fallen asleep with her phone clutched to her chest like a teenager after her first date. And now she was paying for it, stumbling down Main Street with one shoe half-tied and her hair escaping her topknot with rebellious enthusiasm. The bell above the buttered biscuit's door jingled cheerfully as Harper pushed inside, the warm scent of cinnamon and coffee wrapping around her like a hug. Wednesday mornings were usually busy but manageable, farmers getting coffee after early chores, commuters grabbing breakfast before the drive to neighboring towns, and teachers like her desperately seeking caffeine before facing small humans. "Morning, Lou. Can I get my usual?" Harper's greeting died on her lips as a strange hush fell over the cafe. Not complete silence, the espresso machine still hissed, forks still clinked against plates, but the bubbling current of conversation had definitely stuttered. And were people looking at her? She glanced down. No toilet paper on her shoe. Skirt wasn't tucked into her tights. All clear on the wardrobe malfunction front. So why was Mrs. Peterson smiling at her like she'd just won the church raffle? And why was Farmer Miller giving her an actual thumbs up from behind his scrambled eggs? Then she spotted it. The chalkboard wall. The Buttered Biscuits Community Board was legendary in Briar Hollow, a place where birthdays were announced, lost dogs were found, and passive-aggressive quotes about timeliness directed at specific customers were posted. Today, though, it was dominated by a colorful chalk drawing, Harper plus Wes equals, adorned with hearts, exclamation points, and what appeared to be a crossed wrench and teacher's pointer forming an X beneath their names. Flowing cursive and artistic flourishes suggested Marjorie, the cafe owner's artistic 16-year-old daughter, had been struck with romantic inspiration. Harper froze mid-step, her planned coffee order evaporating from her brain. Heat rushed from her chest to her hairline so fast she felt dizzy. She touched her lips unconsciously, the memory of Wes's kiss in the garage flashing through her mind with disorienting clarity. His calloused hand gentle against her cheek, the surprising softness of his mouth on hers, the way he'd smiled afterward, rare and unguarded. "Morning, Ms. Lane." Marjorie emerged from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark curls were pulled into space buns today, and she had a smudge of chalk dust on her cheek. "Do you like it?" She gestured proudly toward her artwork. "Everyone's talking about you too." Harper managed to restart her brain cells just enough to pull her hand away from her mouth. "It's very colorful," she finally said, impressed she could form words while her entire cardiovascular system seemed to be holding auditions for a drum circle. "I used the new chalk set Mr. Hawthorne gave Mom for the cafe," Marjorie continued, oblivious to Harper's internal meltdown. "He said the old ones were leaving too much dust." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He color-coded them by temperature resistance." "Who does that?" Harper smiled despite herself. That sounded exactly like Wes, solving problems no one had complained about yet, making things better without being asked. "Can I get a large vanilla latte, please?" she finally managed, handing over her travel mug with hands that weren't quite steady. "Extra shot today, I think." "Late night?" Marjorie waggled her eyebrows with teenage subtlety. Harper chose dignity over honesty. "Grading papers." As Marjorie went to work on her drink, Harper became uncomfortably aware of the cafe's attention. Not everyone was staring. Briar Hollow residents prided themselves on a veneer of politeness over their rampant nosiness, but she could feel herself being watched. She caught snippets of conversation from nearby tables. "Never seen Wes smile so much. About time he found someone who brings out his good side. Bet they'll be next after the Johnsons' wedding." Mrs. Henderson, a retired librarian who'd given Harper and Wes grief during trivia night, caught her eye from across the room and gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up. Harper returned a smile that felt more genuine than she expected. There was something strangely validating about the town's approval, even if they were approving a relationship that wasn't. Well, that was the question, wasn't it? What exactly was happening between her and Wes? The kiss had changed things. Not just the fact of it, but the way it had happened, in that quiet moment surrounded by motorcycle parts and old dreams, when Wes had finally let her see beneath his grumpy exterior. It hadn't felt like performance. It had felt like a door opening. Earth to Harper. Harper blinked to find Lila sliding into the chair across from her, a bemused expression on her face. She must have wandered to a table on autopilot. "Please tell me you've had coffee already, because that 1,000-yard stare is concerning," Lila said, unwrapping her scarf. Her purple-streaked hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her blazer was ironed to perfection, completely unlike Harper's current drag-through-a-hedge aesthetic. "Not yet," Harper admitted. "I got distracted by the Harper and Wes romantic fan art?" Lila jerked her thumb toward the chalkboard. "Yeah, subtle." "Oh God." Harper dropped her head into her hands. "The whole town is matchmaking." "The whole town has been matchmaking since you accidentally bought a boyfriend at the auction," Lila pointed out. "This is just the latest installment." She studied Harper's face with the intensity of someone who'd known her for years. "So?" The chalkboard. A pause. "This isn't fake anymore, is it?" Harper stirred her latte when Marjorie brought it over, watching the cinnamon swirl into patterns. "I don't know what it is," she admitted quietly. "That's not a no. It's not a yes either." Harper took a sip of her drink, burning her tongue slightly. The pain was clarifying. "It's complicated. Harper Lane, if you're about to give me 'it's complicated' like we're in middle school." "He kissed me," Harper blurted out, the words tumbling free before she could stop them. The confession felt explosive in the small space between them, despite the buzz of conversation around them. Lila's eyes widened. "And?" Harper shrugged, aiming for nonchalance but landing somewhere closer to emotional mess, trying to keep it together. "And it was nice. Really nice. But we haven't talked about it, and I don't know if it was just part of the act or—" Lila cut her off with an undignified snort. "Harper, the man fixed your porch steps at midnight. He's not acting." "How do you know about the steps?" "Kyle saw him. Had some wild theory about Wes being a carpenter vigilante." Lila rolled her eyes. "That man needs a hobby that isn't spying on neighbors." Harper toyed with her mug. Maybe Wes just did it to be nice. He fixes things. That's his whole thing. Does he textually fix things at 1 in the morning? Because your lights were definitely on past midnight. How would you? Harper narrowed her eyes. Are you and Kyle taking shifts? Lila had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have driven by on my way home from book club. At 1 a.m.? It ran late. Mrs. Cleary has opinions about Hemingway. Harper laughed despite herself, the tension easing from her shoulders. You're ridiculous. Both of you. Says the woman pretend dating the town grump, who's clearly not pretending anymore. Lila checked her watch. We should go. Bell in 20. As they gathered their things, Harper cast one last glance at the chalkboard. The question mark after the heart seemed to taunt her. Honestly, it was the perfect punctuation. Because that's exactly what this was, a question she wasn't ready to answer. For your creative writing today, Harper announced to her third graders, I'd like you to write a story about something that makes you smile. She pinned colorful paper to each desk. It can be anything, a person, an animal, a favorite food. Like pizza? Asked Aiden hopefully. Yes, pizza is a valid smile creator, Harper confirmed solemnly. Use your best descriptive words. Remember your 5 senses. As the children began scribbling away, Harper moved between desks, helping with spelling and encouraging their ideas. Temporarily lost in her teaching flow, she forgot her romantic confusion until a small voice piped up from the back row. Is Mr. Wes your boyfriend for real now, Ms. Lane? Harper nearly knocked over Mia's pencil cup. 22 pairs of eyes swiveled toward her with laser focus. She should have known better. Of course her students would have seen the chalkboard or heard their parents talking. In a town where gossip traveled faster than internet service, children were premium intelligence agents. Mr. Hawthorne is, Harper searched frantically for an appropriate descriptor. Friend seemed insufficient. Fake boyfriend was definitely inappropriate for 8-year-old ears. He fixed the classroom door, offered Jaden. It doesn't squeak anymore. And he brought you flowers that one time, added Lily. My mom says that means he likes you. They weren't flowers, Harper corrected automatically. They were plant cuttings for our science unit. She chose not to mention that Wes had carefully labeled each one with proper botanical names and care instructions, or that she'd kept the hand-drawn diagram he'd included. My dad says Mr. Wes never talks to anyone, but he talks to you, said Aiden with the confidence of someone repeating verbatim adult conversation. Harper clapped her hands. Okay, friends. Let's focus on our writing. 5 more minutes, then we'll share. The distraction worked, but Harper's mind remained stuck on their observations. It was true, Wes had been slowly but steadily integrating himself into her classroom world. Fixing the squeak in the door had been just the start. He'd silently replaced the wobbly leg on her desk, installed a better paper towel dispenser, and even built a sturdy rack for the class's rain boots after a particularly muddy field trip. And yet they'd never discussed any of it. He'd just done these things. And she just let him. As if it were the most natural progression in the world. At lunch break, Harper retreated to her classroom rather than brave the teacher's lounge. She needed peace, quiet, and time to grade spelling tests without fielding questions about her relationship status. She unwrapped her slightly squashed sandwich and pulled out her red pen, borrowed from the school secretary, determined to be productive. 3 tests in, a knock at her door made her look up. Wes Hawthorne stood in the hallway, looking slightly out of place among the bright bulletin boards and alphabet posters. His dark hair was neatly combed for once, though a rebellious strand fell over his forehead in a way that made Harper's stomach do an inconvenient flip. He wore his usual work clothes, navy coveralls with Hawthorne Auto embroidered above the pocket, but they looked freshly washed. In one hand, he held a cardboard cup from the buttered biscuit. In the other, something small she couldn't quite see. Hey, he said, his voice low and warm. Got a minute? Sure. Harper tried for casual, but landed somewhere closer to breathless. She gestured to a nearby student chair, and he approached her desk, wisely ignoring the tiny seat. Thought you might need this, he said, holding out the cup. Chamomile with honey. You mentioned it helps on test days. The fact that he'd remembered this casual comment from weeks ago, thrown out during a conversation about her grading headaches, made Harper's chest tighten with emotion. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. Thank you, she said, embarrassed by how touched she felt over a simple tea. That's really thoughtful. Wes shrugged, but the corner of his mouth twitched in a way she'd come to recognize as pleasure. It's just tea. It's not just tea, and you know it. She took a sip, finding it perfectly steeped. How's your morning been? Average. Oil changes, brake check, Mrs. Finster's alternator. He shifted slightly. And this? He produced her missing glitter pen from his pocket, holding it out. You left it at the garage. The pen was slightly bent, as if he'd carried it around for days. Harper recognized it immediately, her special purple one with the star-shaped clip that she'd been hunting for all week. I was going to fix the clip, Wes continued, but I wasn't sure if that would ruin its glitteriness. The serious way he said this, as if glitter pen engineering was a legitimate technical concern, undid something in Harper's heart. She took the pen, examining the bent clip. You can't ruin glitter. It's eternal. Ask any kindergarten teacher. They're still finding glitter from projects done in 1987. His mouth quirked up. Good to know. A weighted silence fell between them. Harper found herself unable to look away from his face, searching for clues about what he was thinking. Since the kiss, they'd texted and seen each other in passing, but they hadn't had a real moment alone. Now here he was, bringing her tea and returning glitter pens like it was the most normal thing in the world. As Wes turned to leave, Harper found herself calling after him. Did you see the cafe chalkboard? He paused in the doorway, a flash of something, embarrassment? Amusement? Crossing his face before settling into careful neutrality. I did. And? He hesitated, then added with unexpected sincerity, I didn't hate it. Before Harper could respond, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The hallway erupted with the sounds of children lining up, and teachers calling instructions. But as she watched him walk away, his shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been weeks ago. Harper allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't pretend anymore for either of them. She picked up the glitter pen and twirled it between her fingers, remembering the feel of his hands, warm and solid, on her waist in the garage. I didn't hate it, he'd said about the chalkboard. From Wes Hawthorne, that was practically a declaration. Harper smiled to herself. For a fake relationship, this was beginning to feel surprisingly real.
8. Sawdust and sparks. Wes raked a hand through his hair, squinting at the wooden picnic bench where he'd laid out his tools. The sun had barely crested the tree line at the festival grounds, mist still clinging to dewy grass as he methodically arranged his socket wrenches, drills, and measuring tape in perfect rows. He'd gotten here an hour before the Build-A-Bench competition was set to begin, determined to at least control this aspect of the event he'd been manipulated into joining. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and caramel apples from vendor stalls being set up nearby. Wes adjusted the placement of his circular saw, ensuring it aligned perfectly with the edge of the table. Order mattered. Predictability mattered. Especially when everything else in his life had become decidedly unpredictable since Harper Lane's accidental bid at that damn bachelor auction. Each tool has a place, huh? Wes turned to find Ted Harmon, the hardware store owner, watching him with amusement. Just being efficient, Wes muttered. Aha. Nervous about working with a teacher? Ted waggled his eyebrows. It's a bench, not a space shuttle. Wes picked up a carpenter's pencil, testing its sharpness. And we're not actually dating. Yeah, sure. Ted winked. My wife says you two have chemistry like baking soda and vinegar. Explosive. Before Wes could correct him again, Ted wandered off to check on the other lumber stations. Wes sighed, turning his attention to inspecting the cedar planks provided for the contest. He ran his fingers along the grain, checking for flaws or weak points. At least wood made sense. Wood didn't have expectations or feelings or hair that caught the sunlight in ways that made his chest tight. Across the grounds, movement caught his eye. Grandma June and her cohort of matchmaking friends, the self-proclaimed Briar Hollow Blossoms, were setting up a judging table, arranging clipboards with suspicious efficiency. His grandmother caught his eye and waved enthusiastically, then made a heart shape with her hands. Wes quickly looked down, focusing intently on examining a plank of cedar as his ears burned. If he'd known the competition judges would be a panel of octogenarian matchmakers, he would have feigned food poisoning this morning. The sound of cheerful humming grew louder, and Wes closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the tune without looking up. Harper had a habit of humming Disney songs when she was excited. Today it was something from Moana. "Good morning, partner." Her voice carried across the workstation, bright as the rising sun. "Ready to build the most spectacular bench Briar Hollow has ever seen?" Wes straightened up, finding Harper dressed in paint-splattered overalls rolled at the cuff and a red flannel shirt with the sleeves pushed up. She pulled her strawberry blonde hair back in a messy knot, tendrils already escaping around her face. The sight of her, practical, ready to work, but still unmistakably Harper with tiny leaf-shaped earrings dangling from her ears, did something weird to his heart rate. "Morning," he managed, watching as she hefted an enormous tote bag onto the picnic table. The canvas strained at the seams. "I brought reinforcements," she announced with a grin, setting the bag down with a thud. As if on cue, the bag tipped, spilling several paintbrushes, a set of stencils, sandpaper in various grits, and what appeared to be a small container of was that glitter. Wes eyed the collection warily. "It's supposed to be a bench, not an art installation." "It's supposed to be both. That's what makes it special." She began arranging her supplies with the same care he'd shown his tools, though with considerably less precision. "Besides, we want to win, don't we?" "We want to build something that won't collapse when someone sits on it," he corrected, but found his lips twitching toward a smile despite himself. Mayor Jasper's voice boomed through a megaphone, calling for everyone's attention. "Welcome to Briar Hollow's first annual Build-A-Bench competition." He strode to the center of the gathering crowd, bow tie bobbing as he gestured expansively. "Today, our couples will be building relationships while building benches. Remember, these masterpieces will be placed throughout our town park for years to come, so make them sturdy and make them special just like your partnerships." Wes stifled a groan. Beside him, Harper bounced on her toes, radiating enthusiasm. "Let the construction begin." The mayor fired a starter pistol loaded with confetti, sending a shower of orange and gold paper fluttering over the contestants. Harper immediately unfurled a sketch, smoothing it against the workbench. Wes leaned in, studying the drawing with growing alarm. Elaborate curves adorned the backrest, decorative cutouts lined the sides, and what appeared to be a pattern of leaves and vines meandered across the entire surface. "This is..." Wes searched for a diplomatic word. "Ambitious." "I know, right?" Harper beamed, completely missing his concern. "I thought about the town's history and the fall festival theme, so the leaves represent renewal and community, and these curves here echo the hills around Briar Hollow and..." "Harper," Wes cut in gently, tapping the drawing. "This would take a master woodworker a week to complete." Her face fell slightly. "Oh. Is it too complicated?" Something twisted in Wes's chest at her disappointment. "Let's modify it. Keep the spirit but simplify the execution." Working together, they sketched a revised design that maintained Harper's vision, but pared it down to something achievable in 4 hours. Wes found himself surprised by her quick grasp of structural needs, and she seemed equally impressed when he suggested ways to incorporate her decorative elements without compromising integrity. They were making good progress until they reached their first real disagreement. Harper wanted to add decorative cutouts along the backrest, stylized leaf shapes that would create dappled light patterns. "It'll compromise the structural integrity," Wes argued, measuring tape in hand as he traced the proposed cuts. "The back support needs to be solid." "It'll add character," Harper countered, wielding her pencil like a conductor's baton. "The cutouts will be small and they'll make it unique. Otherwise it's just a bench." "Which is what we're supposed to be building," Wes pointed out. "A special bench," she insisted. "One that makes people want to sit on it and stay a while." They reached a stalemate, staring at each other across the half-assembled frame. Harper's hazel eyes held frustration but also that stubborn optimism that seemed to follow her everywhere. Wes noticed the look of genuine disappointment softening her features and felt his resolve crumbling. "Fine," he relented with a sigh. "But I'm reinforcing the back support with crossbeams underneath. And we're keeping the cutouts minimal." Her face brightened immediately. "Deal? You won't regret it." "I already do," he muttered, but there was no heat behind it. As they worked, Wes found himself surprised by Harper's practical knowledge. She handled the power drill with unexpected confidence, explaining she'd helped renovate her classroom last summer. When she perfectly executed a difficult beveled edge on one of the armrests, Wes couldn't help but nod approvingly. "Not bad for a glitter pen enthusiast," he commented. She flicked sawdust at his shoulder, grinning. "There's more to me than my novelty stationery collection, Hawthorne." He was beginning to realize that. By midday, the skeleton of their bench had taken shape. Around them, other couples were in various states of progress, some arguing, some working in focused silence, one pair apparently having abandoned construction in favor of a heated makeout session behind their lumber pile. "Break for water?" Harper suggested, wiping her brow with her forearm. Her cheeks were flushed from exertion, a smudge of sawdust across one cheekbone. Without thinking, Wes reached out and brushed the dust away with his thumb. Her skin was warm beneath his touch, and he watched her eyes widen slightly at the contact. He pulled his hand back quickly. "You had sawdust," he explained unnecessarily, suddenly finding the grain of the cedar plank fascinating. "Thanks." Her voice was softer than usual. After gulping down water, Harper revealed a set of stencils from her bag, intricate autumn leaves in various sizes. Wes eyed them skeptically. "Just trust me," she said, noticing his expression. "They'll complement the cutouts perfectly." She demonstrated the technique on a scrap piece, showing how she planned to burn the patterns lightly into the wood rather than paint them. Their hands brushed as she guided the wood-burning tool, and Wes became acutely aware of how often they'd been touching today, passing tools, steadying lumber, guiding measurements. Each contact sent a current through him that he tried to ignore. It wasn't working. The competition intensified as the mayor announced the 1-hour mark. Wes and Harper worked with increasing synchronization, anticipating each other's needs. When he reached for the sander, she already had it plugged in. When she struggled with aligning a support bracket, he steadied the beam without being asked. "We make a pretty good team," Harper said, her voice warm with surprise. Wes grunted noncommittally, but privately he agreed. There was something unexpectedly satisfying about creating something together, his precision complementing her vision, her creativity balancing his practicality. The moment of harmony was short-lived. With 40 minutes remaining, Harper struggled with a particularly stubborn piece of hardware that needed to connect the backrest to the frame. Her frustration was evident as she tried repeatedly to line up the difficult angle. "Need help?" Wes offered. "No, I've got it," she insisted, determination tightening her jaw. But after another failed attempt, she blew out a breath. "Actually, maybe a little." Instead of taking over, Wes worked silently alongside her, neither doing the job for her nor letting her struggle alone. Together they solved the problem, finding a way to secure the connection that was even stronger than originally planned. When they finished, they exchanged a look of mutual satisfaction that felt more intimate than it should have. "We should celebrate with lunch after this," Harper said suddenly. "Win or lose." "My treat." Wes hesitated, his instinct to retreat warring with the undeniable pull he felt toward her. "We'll see," he answered finally, unable to commit but equally unable to refuse outright. With 15 minutes remaining, disaster struck. A loud crack split the air as the main support beam fractured along an unseen flaw in the wood. Harper's face fell as their hard work threatened to collapse. "No, no, no," she whispered, hands hovering helplessly over the splintering wood. Without hesitation, Wes shifted into problem-solving mode, quickly assessing the damage. "It's fixable," he said with more confidence than he felt. He retrieved spare lumber from their allocation and began creating a reinforcement that would both stabilize the structure and incorporate Harper's design. "Hold this," he instructed, and Harper immediately moved to help, their bodies working in tandem. "Now clamp it here." "Perfect." Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked against the clock, making rapid calculations and adjustments. What had started as a repair evolved into an enhancement, the replacement piece actually improving the original design. "We've got this," he said with unexpected conviction when he caught Harper biting her lip anxiously. The brightness of her answering smile nearly knocked him backward. In the final moments, Harper added subtle touches that transformed their creation from functional to extraordinary. She sanded rough edges to perfect smoothness, applied a coating that brought out the cedar's rich grain, and carefully burned delicate leaf patterns that complemented rather than overwhelmed the bench's clean lines. Wes watched her work, struck by the realization that their bench was neither just practical nor merely decorative. It had somehow become both. Like them, he thought before he could stop himself. "Time's up," Mayor Jasper announced. "Tools down, everyone." Harper stepped back from their creation, hair escaping completely from her topknot now, cheeks flushed with exertion and excitement. "What do you think?" she asked Wes, suddenly looking uncertain. He studied the bench they'd created. The clean, sturdy lines he'd insisted on provided a perfect framework for the artistic elements Harper had added. The leaf cutouts cast dappled shadows across the seat, while the burned stencil patterns gave the impression of falling leaves caught in a gentle breeze. It was undeniably beautiful but also rock solid. He'd stake his reputation on it, holding up for years. "It's good," he said simply, which from him was high praise. The judging began with Grandma June leading her cohort from bench to bench, making an elaborate show of impartiality, despite checking Wes and Harper's progress every 20 minutes throughout the day. When they reached Wes and Harper's creation, the women circled it slowly, inspecting every joint and feature. Mrs. Henderson, the retired librarian with cat-eye glasses perpetually perched on her nose, ran her hand over the smooth finish and declared with authority, "This bench is like the two of you, his strength, her flair, made for each other." The crowd murmured approval as Wes felt heat rise to his face. Harper ducked her head, but not before he caught her pleased smile. After what felt like an eternity of deliberation, but was probably 5 minutes of theatrical whispering behind clipboards, the judges returned to the center of the grounds. After careful consideration, Grandma June announced, "The winner of Briar Hollow's first Build-A-Bench competition is..." She paused dramatically, making eye contact with her grandson, Wesley Hawthorne and Harper Lane. Before Wes could process their victory, Harper launched herself at him, throwing her arms around his neck in genuine excitement. His hands found her waist automatically, steadying them both as the crowd erupted in cheers. She was warm and solid against him, smelling of cedar and sunshine, and for a moment he forgot they had an audience at all. Mayor Jasper approached with a heart-shaped trophy that made Wes want to roll his eyes, but Harper's delight was so infectious that he found himself smiling despite himself. As cameras flashed and the town celebrated around them, Wes realized that for the first time in years he didn't mind being the center of attention, because he was sharing it with her. The thought terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. "Where should our bench go?" Harper asked, still standing close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. "Somewhere people will use it," Wes answered practically. "Near the playground, maybe." "I was thinking by the oak tree overlooking the pond," she countered. "Where you can watch the sunset." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that they were both imagining the same scene, the two of them sitting there together as day turned to evening, neither pretending anymore. "Yeah," Wes said quietly. "That would work too."
9. Glitter and Ghosts. Harper's fingers were still sticky with wood stain as she and Wes escaped the post-competition celebrations, trophy awkwardly tucked under her arm. "Quick, while June is distracted by the pie contest," she whispered conspiratorially, tugging Wes by the sleeve toward the town square. Her heart performed a little jitterbug dance inside her chest, half from the quick getaway and half from, well, something else entirely. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees as evening settled over Briar Hollow, the festival noise fading behind them. Harper resisted the urge to skip. They'd won. Together. The memory of Wes's concentrated face as he measured twice, while she impatiently counted the seconds, made her smile. She'd been so sure they'd kill each other before the bench was finished. "What's that look for?" Wes asked, slowing his pace to match hers. "Just thinking about how you nearly had an aneurysm when I suggested we add carved initials to the backrest. Because we were 10 minutes from the deadline, and you wanted to start wood carving. It would have been romantic." "It would have been lopsided," he countered, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward. They reached the white gazebo, Briar Hollow's unofficial romance spot, where Harper set down the trophy and pulled out her phone. "For believability," she explained with a small smile, though they both knew no one was watching. "We need photographic evidence of our triumphant victory." Wes leaned against the railing, illuminated by the soft glow of string lights. "You just want to document that I participated in something called a couple's bench build-off," he said dryly. "It's for posterity. Future generations need to know what miracles once walked this earth." She held up her phone. "Now stop looking like you're at a funeral and smile." "This is my smile." Harper snorted. "That's your the check engine light is on but the customer swears nothing's wrong face." Wes crossed his arms. "I have different faces?" "At least 17. I've been cataloging them." Something flickered across his features, Wes' face number 12, the one where he was surprised but secretly pleased. Harper positioned herself beside him for a selfie, their shoulders touching as she extended her arm. The first photo caught Wes mid-blink, the second showed Harper laughing at his expression. The third captured something softer, Wes looking at Harper instead of the camera, the hint of a genuine smile playing at his lips. She lowered the phone, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Close enough that she could smell the faint traces of cedar and motor oil that clung to him, no matter how much he scrubbed his hands. Close enough to notice how the string lights caught golden flecks in his eyes she'd never seen before. "Got one where I don't look concussed?" he asked, voice gruff but gentle. Harper's thumb scrolled through the photos. "Actually, yes." She showed him the third one, watching his face carefully. "This is pretty good." He didn't answer right away, just studied the image with an unreadable expression. Finally, he nodded. "You can use that one for your Harper and Wes scrapbook." "Bold of you to assume I haven't already started one." The night air carried the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke as they settled on the gazebo bench, their trophies sitting between them like a chaperone. Harper traced the heart shape with her fingertip, uncharacteristically quiet. Her thoughts swirled like fallen leaves in a gust of wind, impossible to catch or arrange in any sensible pattern. "Penny for your thoughts?" Wes asked, his voice low in the stillness. Harper took a slow breath. She could say something light, make a joke about their bench being superior to all other benches, tease him about actually having fun for once, mention how Grandma June had been unsubtly mouthing kiss him during the award ceremony. Instead, she surprised herself. "I was just thinking about why I came to Briar Hollow," Harper said. She told the sanitized version to many, needing a change, falling in love with the school, but rarely the whole truth. Something about the quiet darkness and Wes's steady presence made honesty feel possible. "Did I ever tell you I was engaged before moving here?" Wes shifted slightly, his body angling toward her. "No." "His name was Evan. We met at a teaching conference, dated for 2 years, got engaged." Harper twisted a loose thread on her sleeve. "He was very organized. Had these perfect lesson plans that looked like they belonged in a museum. Color-coded calendar. 5-year plan." "Sounds thrilling," Wes deadpanned. A laugh bubbled out of her. "That's what he said about me, actually. That I was thrilling at first. Then draining. Then exhausting to love." The words still had teeth even years later. Wes didn't interrupt as Harper described her previous life, the high-pressure teaching position in the city, the fiancé who grew increasingly irritated by her enthusiasm, the burnout that left her questioning everything. "I was working 16-hour days, bringing home every student problem, crying over test scores, typical first-year teacher stuff. But then it just never stopped." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "He said I was too much, too emotional, too involved with my students, too me?" Her voice caught. "Sometimes I still wonder if he was right." Wes was quiet for so long that Harper began to worry she'd overshared. She opened her mouth to backtrack, to make a joke, anything to dispel the sudden heaviness when he finally spoke. "My dad used to say there are 2 kinds of people in the world, those who fill rooms and those who hold them steady." He looked down at his hands, rough with calluses. "Some people are meant to hold space for the joy bringers." Harper blinked, struck by the unexpected poetry from a man who communicated primarily in grunts and nods. The gazebo creaked gently in the night breeze as Wes considered his next words. Finally, he shifted the trophy aside and moved closer. "For what it's worth," he said carefully, "I don't think you're too much." His callous thumb brushed a stray tear from her cheek. "I think you're exactly as much as you're supposed to be." The simple words hit Harper like a thunderclap. How long had she carried that weight? The fear that her natural enthusiasm was somehow wrong, that she needed to be less to be loved. And here was Wes, the most contained person she knew, telling her that she was just right. Harper's breath caught at his words. The fairy lights reflected in his eyes as he watched her, waiting. "When did you get so wise, Wesley Hawthorne?" she whispered, leaning imperceptibly closer. His mouth quirked up at one corner. "Somewhere between being auctioned off and building award-winning furniture, I guess." Harper couldn't have said who moved first. One moment they were sitting close, the next his hands were cradling her face and her fingers were tangled in his hair. This kiss was different from their others. No audience, no pretense, no hesitation. His hand shifted to the back of her neck as she melted against him, fingers clutching his flannel shirt. It deepened slowly, deliberately, like they were learning each other's rhythms. When they finally broke apart, Harper felt breathless and anchored all at once. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape, possibly to write poetry or compose symphonies, or do whatever hearts did, when they were suddenly impossibly full. "That wasn't for the town gossips," she murmured. "No," Wes agreed, his voice rough. "That was just for us." Neither seemed eager to return to the festival. They sat close, Harper's head on Wes's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her. The distant sounds of the fair, laughter, music, the occasional cheer from the pie contest, drifted through the night air. "I should get you home," Wes said eventually, though he made no move to stand. Harper twisted to look up at him. Or? His eyebrow quirked up. Or? You could show me that loft you've been restoring. Above the garage. She rushed on, suddenly feeling shy. You mentioned it last week when you were fixing Mrs. Templeton's car, and I've been curious. You want to see my apartment? The surprise in his voice was genuine. If that's okay. I mean, only if you want to show me. No pressure. It's not like I've been imagining what your bookshelves look like or anything. She cut herself off, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. And I'm rambling. Wes's smile was small, but it reached all the way to his eyes. Yeah, you are. He stood, offering his hand. Come on. I'll give you the grand tour. All 700 square feet of it. The drive was comfortable, filled with soft music from the radio and occasional glances that held more meaning than words. Harper hummed along, her fingers drumming lightly on her thigh. Wes drove with one hand on the wheel, relaxed and steady. Every few minutes he'd glance over at her, as if making sure she was still there, still real. At the garage, he led her up the exterior stairs to a door painted deep blue. It's still a work in progress, he warned as he unlocked it. But as he flipped on the lights, Harper realized his warning was entirely unnecessary. Wes's loft surprised her: warm wood floors, tall windows, bookshelves filled with actual books, not just car manuals. The space was open, with a kitchen along one wall, a living area with a weathered leather couch, and doors she assumed led to the bathroom and bedroom. What struck her most wasn't the tidiness, though it was impressively neat, or the tasteful decor, minimal but warm. It was how thoroughly Wes it felt, practical, unpretentious, but full of quiet care. Wes, this is gorgeous, she breathed, taking in the exposed brick wall and the wrought iron light fixtures he must have restored himself. You did all this? He moved around the space with a hint of nervousness, adjusting a pillow on the couch. Most of it. The plumbing needed a professional. And June helped with the curtains. Harper wandered to the bookshelves, running her finger along the spines. History books. Biographies. Classic novels. Repair manuals intermingled with poetry collections. Emily Dickinson? June's influence, he said quickly. Him. She didn't believe him for a second. She drifted to the wall of photographs. Grandma June, decades younger, her arm around a man with Wes's jawline. A teenage Wes working on engines with who must be his father. A family portrait where little Wes looked uncomfortable in a button-down shirt. Coffee? Wes offered, already filling a kettle. Please? She continued her exploration, delighting in the details. A hand-carved chess set on an antique table, a quilt draped over a reading chair, a cat-shaped bookend that seemed wildly out of place until Harper remembered June's cat fixation. This wasn't just a bachelor pad. This was a home. Wes brought over 2 steaming mugs, and they settled on the leather couch. So does it pass inspection, Miss Lane? With flying colors, Mr. Hawthorne. She cradled her mug between her hands. Though I am disappointed by the lack of engine parts on the coffee table. Those are in the bedroom, he deadpanned. Kinky. He nearly choked on his coffee, and Harper felt a rush of pleasure at catching him off guard. Teasing Wes was becoming her favorite hobby. The way his ears turned pink, how he tried and failed to hide his smile behind his mug. They talked for hours. About Harper's students, about Wes's restoration projects, about growing up in Briar Hollow versus arriving as an adult. She told him about her classroom disasters, the great glitter explosion, the escaped class hamster incident, the time she accidentally used permanent marker on the whiteboard. He shared stories of his teenage years, setting the high school mascot costume on fire, accidentally, rebuilding his first motorcycle, the summer he and his friends camped out at the lake for 2 solid weeks. Harper's head came to rest against his shoulder, her empty mug abandoned on the coffee table. His arm wrapped around her, warm and solid. Did you have a crush on anyone in high school? She asked drowsily. Melissa Winters. Chemistry class. She could recite the periodic table from memory. Sexy. To 16-year-old me? Absolutely. His fingers traced idle patterns on her shoulder. What about you? Who was Harper Lane's high school heartthrob? James Sullivan. He played guitar and wrote terrible poetry that I thought was so deep. She yawned, snuggling closer. He wrote a song called Parking Lot Princesses that was supposedly about me. Charming. It rhymed heart with shopping cart. Wes's chest rumbled with a quiet laugh. No wonder you have such high standards. When she yawned again, he suggested she should get home. But the thought of leaving this warm bubble, of returning to her empty house, made her chest tighten. Or, she hesitated, suddenly uncertain, I could stay. The silence that followed felt enormous. I didn't mean, Harper sat up, backtracking. Just to sleep. If that's okay. It's late and I'm comfortable and… Harper, Wes interrupted gently. You can stay. He offered his bed while he took the couch. She hesitated, then asked him to stay beside her, just to sleep. He lent her a soft gray t-shirt that reached mid-thigh, somehow both ridiculous and perfect. In the darkness of his bedroom, with his steady breathing beside her and his arm tentatively draped across her waist, Harper realized with crystal clarity that what began as pretend had become the most real thing in her life. The words I love you formed in her mind, but she held them back, afraid to shatter this fragile new understanding between them. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his and listened to his heartbeat, solid and steady as the man himself, until sleep claimed them both.
10. The pullback. Wes's knees dug into the concrete as he lay beneath Mrs. Henderson's ancient Chevy, the familiar smell of oil and metal wrapping around him like an old blanket. Monday morning sunlight filtered through the garage's high windows, catching dust motes that danced above him. He made a mental note to check the transmission fluid again before calling her. The old car deserved better than a rush job. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, but his mind kept wandering back to the weekend. Harper's head on his shoulder. The way she'd curled against him in sleep, fitting perfectly in the space beside him. How natural it felt to wake up and find her there, her hair a strawberry blonde tangle across his pillow. He'd made her coffee in his chipped NASA mug while she'd hummed something off-key, wearing his flannel shirt that hung to her knees. Wes realized he was half smiling at the memory and caught himself, schooling his features back to neutral even though no one was around to see. Getting soft wasn't something he could afford. Getting soft meant getting hurt. The shop bell jingled, yanking him back to reality. Customers. He rolled out from under the Chevy, wiping his hands on a rag as he stood. Be right with you, he called, heading toward the back office for an intake form. He recognized the voices before he saw them, Jeff Simmons and Mark Donovan. High school football stars turned local business owners, they both drove vehicles expensive enough to announce they'd left Briar Hollow and come back successful. Wes had replaced Jeff's timing belt last spring and rotated Mark's tires in July. They were pleasant enough customers, always paid on time, and didn't try to explain his job to him like some did. He gathered a clipboard and pen, about to step back into the main shop area when their conversation froze him in place. Can't believe Harper Lane is still dating the Hawthorne guy, Jeff was saying, the paper coffee cup crinkling as he helped himself to the ancient machine Wes kept by the waiting area. She could do way better than a grease monkey with trust issues. Mark laughed in agreement. Right. She's this sunshine personified, and he's, well, you remember how he was after his dad died. Basically a hermit. Some people don't change. Wes stood motionless, clipboard halfway to the counter. He should interrupt them. Should make noise, clear his throat, anything to stop whatever was coming next. But his body wouldn't move. Bet you $20 she gets bored within a month, Jeff continued. Teachers like that, all energy and personality, they need someone who can match them. Not some brooding mechanic who can barely string a sentence together at town meetings. The words landed like punches, each one precisely targeted to hit old bruises. Wes inhaled slowly through his nose, forced himself forward. Professional. He was a professional. He emerged from the office, face carefully blank as he handed them the clipboard. Oil change and inspection. His voice sounded normal to his own ears, though his chest felt like someone had tightened a vice around it. The men had the decency to look slightly embarrassed when they saw him, Mark's ears reddening at the tips, Jeff suddenly fascinated by the paperwork. But it didn't matter. Their words had already lodged like shrapnel under his skin. Yeah, the SUV's been making a weird noise when I accelerate, Jeff muttered, not quite meeting Wes's eyes. I'll check it out, Wes responded, his customer tone perfectly intact. Should be ready by 4. Need a ride somewhere? No, Mark's gonna drop me at the office. Thanks though. Wes nodded, pocketing the keys Jeff handed over. The two men left quickly, conversation muted now, the bell jangling with their departure. He stood alone in the sudden silence, the shop eerily quiet apart from the ticking of the wall clock. She could do way better. Wes turned and walked mechanically to the Chevy, sliding back underneath where nobody could see his face. By 2 o'clock, Wes had finished Mrs. Henderson's car and was halfway through Jeff's SUV inspection, but the morning's conversation still echoed in his ears. Throughout the day, the comments replayed on endless loop. Some people don't change. She gets bored within a month. Not some brooding mechanic who can barely string a sentence together. The worst part was he couldn't even disagree with them. Hadn't he thought the same things himself? Hadn't he wondered what the hell Harper was doing with him every time she laughed at one of his half-formed jokes, or looked at him with those bright hazel eyes like he was something special? He'd allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, what was happening with Harper could be real. That whatever had started as a ridiculous auction mistake and a fake dating scheme had somehow transformed into something honest. Something worth having. But reality crashed back with the force of a dropped engine block. He was exactly what they said, a small-town mechanic with emotional baggage heavy enough to sink a battleship. Her brightness deserved more than his shadows. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands before checking it. Harper, still good for dinner at my place tonight? Making that pasta thing you pretended not to love last time. Wes stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. The thought of sitting across from her at her tiny kitchen table, watching her talk with her hands, seeing that little crinkle she got between her eyebrows when she was thinking, it hurt now. Because Jeff was right. She'd get bored. Or worse, she'd stay out of some misplaced sense of loyalty or pity. After long minutes he typed back. Wes can't tonight. Backed up at the shop. Another time. Her reply came almost instantly. Harper, no problem. Tomorrow works better anyway. I can grade papers tonight and be fully present for your grumpy charm tomorrow. He swallowed hard, the knot in his throat making it difficult to breathe. Tomorrow. He needed an excuse for tomorrow too. Wes, inventory coming in. Staying late to catalog parts. She didn't respond right away this time. He imagined her frowning at her phone, maybe sitting at her desk at school, surrounded by the colorful chaos of her classroom. Harper, okay? Wednesday lunch instead. I can bring food to you. Something twisted painfully in his chest. She was trying so hard, making it so difficult to do what needed to be done. Wes, special order coming in. Rain check? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Harper, everything okay? You seem distant. No. Nothing was okay. But he'd known from the start that this, whatever this was, had an expiration date. He'd just been foolish enough to lose track of time. Wes fine? Just busy. He shoved the phone back in his pocket before he could say something he'd regret. Something honest. Something that would keep her holding on when she should be letting go. By Thursday afternoon, Wes had successfully avoided seeing Harper for 4 days straight. 4 miserable sleepless days during which he'd buried himself in work, coming in early and staying late. He'd even fielded a concerned call from June, deflecting her questions with mumbled excuses about deadline repairs. The shop bell rang, and Wes didn't bother crawling out from under the Ford F-150 he was working on. Be out in a minute, he called, tightening a bolt with more force than necessary. No rush, came a familiar voice that sent a jolt through his system. I brought reinforcements. Wes closed his eyes briefly, then slid out from beneath the truck. Harper stood there, backlit by sunlight streaming through the open bay door, carrying a wicker picnic basket. She wore a simple yellow dress with a denim jacket, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her smile, her smile was tentative but hopeful. Thought you could use lunch since you're so swamped, she said, setting the basket on his desk by the wall. Wes wiped his hands mechanically on a rag, aware of grease under his fingernails, a smudge on his forearm, the general dishevelment that came with crawling around engine bays all day. He felt suddenly painfully conscious of who he was and who she was. Oil and water. Thanks, he mumbled, not quite meeting her eyes. But I've got to finish this transmission before the owner comes by. Oh. The single syllable carried a weight of disappointment that made his chest tighten. Well, it'll be here when you're ready. I packed enough for dinner too in case. Her voice trailed off and he risked a glance up. Harper's smile had faltered slightly, but she nodded, stepping closer to touch his arm briefly. The warmth of her fingers against his skin sent a current through him, and he nearly leaned into it before catching himself. I should let you get back to work, she said softly. Call me later? He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and watched as she walked out, the yellow of her dress the last thing to disappear through the door. The basket sat untouched on his desk all afternoon. Every time Wes passed it, something in his chest pulled tight. Finally, at closing time, with no more excuses to avoid it, He lifted the checkered cloth covering. Sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Homemade chocolate chip cookies that still smelled fresh. Containers of fruit and pasta salad. Even a thermos that, when he unscrewed the cap, released the rich aroma of coffee. Tucked beneath the thermos was a folded note. Wes opened it with oil-stained fingers, careful not to smudge the paper. For the hardest worker in Briar Hollow. Miss your grumpy face. H. Wes stared at the looping handwriting until the letters blurred together, something hot and tight building in his throat. He blinked rapidly, then methodically repacked everything into the basket, his appetite gone. The coffee he poured into the sink, watching the dark liquid circle the drain before disappearing. Friday evening, Wes was organizing tools that didn't need organizing when the shop door banged open with enough force to rattle the windows. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. Only one person in town entered a room like a hurricane in floral print. Wesley Alexander Hawthorne. June's voice cracked like a whip across the garage. What do you think you're doing? He continued alphabetizing wrenches, determined not to engage. Working, Grandma. Like always. Well, you're the only one, she huffed, marching closer. Because Harper Lane isn't. That girl is sitting in her apartment with puffy eyes wondering what she did wrong, while you're hiding in here playing with socket sets. Wes's hands stilled momentarily before he forced them back to motion. I'm not hiding. I'm running a business. Don't you lie to me, boy. I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. June's tone softened to something worse than anger, disappointment. That girl cares about you. Really cares. And you're throwing it away because you're scared. The wrench in his hand clattered loudly as he dropped it into the drawer. You don't understand, Wes snapped, slamming the drawer shut with more force than necessary. This whole thing, it was never supposed to be real. It was your scheme, remember? And now everyone's expecting. He trailed off, unable to articulate the weight of expectation, the certainty of eventual disappointment. Expecting what? June challenged, hands on hips. That you might actually be happy for once. That you might let someone love you. That's not. Listen to me, she interrupted, stepping closer. I've watched you shut yourself away in this garage for years, fixing everybody else's problems and ignoring your own. I know you think you're protecting yourself, but all you're doing is guaranteeing you'll end up alone. Maybe that's what I deserve, he muttered, the words escaping before he could stop them. June's face softened. She reached for him, but he stepped back, unable to handle her comfort right now. It would break whatever fragile control he had left. Nobody deserves to be alone, Wesley. Especially not you. She sighed, recognizing his withdrawal. Whatever you heard or whatever you're thinking, you're wrong. That girl looks at you like you hung the moon. But even the moon disappears if you turn your back on it long enough. I need to close up, he said quietly. Please go. June stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, resigned. You know where to find me when you're done being stubborn. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. Your father would have told you not to make his mistakes. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Wes alone with the echo of her words. Darkness had fallen outside by the time Wes finished locking up the office. He should go home, shower off the day's grime, eat something, all the normal routines. Instead, he found himself walking over to the bench sitting in the corner of the shop. He and Harper had built it together at the fall festival. She'd insisted on carving a pattern of leaves along the back support. It needs personality, Wes, while he'd focused on making sure the thing wouldn't collapse the moment someone sat on it. They'd bickered the entire time, her laugh piercing through his grumbling, until somehow they'd created something neither would have made alone. Wes sat down heavily on the bench, running his fingers over the leaf pattern. The wood was smooth beneath his touch, the carving surprisingly precise for something done in a rush with borrowed tools. His phone weighed heavy in his pocket. He pulled it out, seeing 3 missed calls from Harper, a final text sent an hour ago. Harper, whatever I did, I'm sorry. Just talk to me? Something cracked inside him, a fissure running through carefully constructed walls. He'd hurt her. The very thing he'd been trying to avoid, her eventual disappointment, her realization that he wasn't enough, and he'd caused it anyway. Just in a different form. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. What would he say? That he'd heard 2 guys at the coffee machine say what he'd been thinking all along. That he wasn't good enough for her. That eventually the whole town would figure out their mistake, and the gossip would turn ugly. It was easier to be alone than to watch her realize what everyone else already knew, that she deserved better than what he could offer. Wes shut off his phone, shoving it back in his pocket. The garage felt suddenly too quiet, too empty. In his mind, he could hear his father's voice, clear as day despite the years since he'd lost him. Son, there are only two mistakes worth avoiding in life: treating things like they matter when they don't, and treating things like they don't matter when they do. But his father had been wrong about many things. Why not this too? Wes stood, reaching for the light switch. The bench disappeared into darkness as he locked the garage door behind him, walking out into the empty street.
11. When you stop pretending. Harper stared at the paper pumpkin cutouts dangling from the ceiling, their cheerful faces at odds with the hollow feeling in her chest. The classroom smelled of glue and cinnamon, that morning's sensory activity still lingering in the air. 5 days. 120 hours of silence that had felt progressively heavier with each passing minute. She picked up her phone from the desk, thumbs hovering over the screen. The message thread with Wes sat unchanged since Monday, her 3 increasingly casual texts followed by his terse, sorry, swamped at the garage reply. No explanation. No warmth. Nothing that resembled the man who had held her through the night in his loft above the auto shop, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm as they whispered about childhood dreams and adult disappointments. Hey, just checking in, she typed, then watched as she deleted each letter one by one. Her reflection caught her eye in the classroom window, the afternoon light cruel enough to highlight the shadows beneath her eyes. The smile she'd maintained all day for 22 third graders had finally slipped away, leaving behind the truth she'd been avoiding. Something between them had broken, and she didn't know how to fix it. Wow. You look like you haven't slept in days. Harper turned to find Lila in the doorway, balancing 2 takeout cups from the buttered biscuit, and wearing the expression that meant she wasn't buying whatever Harper was selling. Lifesaver, Harper murmured, accepting the coffee with both hands, as if its warmth might somehow reach the cold spot that had taken up residence beneath her ribs. Just busy with fall family night prep. Lila's eyebrow arched so high it nearly disappeared beneath her purple-streaked bangs. Is that what we're calling heartbreak these days? The word hit like a physical blow. Heartbreak. So that's what this was. Unable to maintain the pretense any longer, Harper crossed the room and sank into the oversized beanbag chair in the reading corner, a spot usually reserved for students who needed a moment of comfort or quiet. The vinyl squeaked beneath her as she tucked her legs underneath her. He just disappeared, Lil. The coffee warmed her hands but did nothing for the chill that had settled over her. Everything was perfect. We spent the night together, not like that but close, and then nothing. Radio silence. Her voice caught on the last word, embarrassing her. I thought it had become real for both of us. Lila settled onto the rainbow rug across from her, cross-legged and focused. So the mechanic needs a tune-up in the emotional intelligence department. Color me shocked. It's not funny, Harper whispered, though a tiny part of her appreciated the attempt. No, it's not, Lila agreed, her snark dissolving into genuine concern. It's great at jackass behavior, especially after everything you two have been. She stopped herself. Wait. Define close. Harper's cheeks warmed despite everything. We talked. All night. About real things, his parents, my ex, why I left the city. She traced the plastic lid of her coffee cup. He held my hand the whole time, Lil. And the way he kissed me, it wasn't for show. There wasn't anyone watching. And then he went full ghost mode. Not even ghost. Ghosts are at least interesting. This is just vacancy. Men, Lila pronounced, as if diagnosing a particularly virulent disease. Have you considered that maybe he's just... Don't say scared, Harper cut in. That's what everyone says. He's just afraid of his feelings. Well, so was I. But I showed up anyway. Lila reached over and squeezed her hand. Fall family night is in 3 hours. We should probably start setting up. You going to be okay putting on the Ms. Lane show tonight? Harper nodded, letting Lila pull her to her feet. It's actually easier to be Ms. Lane right now than Harper. She smoothed down her pumpkin-patterned cardigan, straightened her shoulders, and summoned a smile that almost reached her eyes. Ms. Lane has everything under control. Just a little higher on the right, Harper called, watching as Lila adjusted the banner that read, Welcome Fall Families, across the multi-purpose room entrance. The space had been transformed with student artwork, science projects, and seasonal decorations. Everything was perfect, which was exactly how Harper needed it to be tonight. So, Lila said, climbing down from the stepladder, have you asked him directly what's going on? Harper nodded, carefully adjusting a crooked name tag on a display of self-portraits. He says he's busy. She smoothed the construction paper flat. But I've seen his truck parked outside the diner twice this week. The admission hurt more than she wanted it to. It was one thing to be ghosted for legitimate reasons. It was another to realize you were being actively avoided. Maybe he's got car trouble, Lila offered weakly. Harper folded her arms across her chest, suddenly cold under the fluorescent lights. I think he's figured out I'm in love with him, and he doesn't feel the same. She said it casually, like commenting on the weather, as if the words didn't scrape her throat raw on their way out. Oh, Harps. Lila's expression softened. Are you sure that's it? What else could it be? We were fine, better than fine, and then suddenly he can't even look at me. She busied herself aligning refreshment plates with mathematical precision. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The whole thing started as pretend, so I guess we're just back to reality now. That's the biggest load of? The doors swung open, and a stream of excitement poured in as the first families arrived. Harper instantly transformed, her smile brightening and her voice rising half an octave into what Lila called her kindergarten teacher register, even though she taught 3rd grade. The Johnson family. Don't you look festive tonight? Zach, your volcano project is right over there, honey. For the next half hour, Harper high-fived students, complimented parents on their involvement, and discussed progress reports with genuine engagement. She existed in a bubble of professional warmth that allowed her to force all thoughts of Wes Hawthorne, his calloused hands, his rare laugh, the way he'd looked at her in the rain, to the background. Ms. Lane? Emma Pearson tugged at her cardigan sleeve. Did you know my grandma said you and the carman broke up? The bubble popped. Harper crouched down to Emma's level, heart hammering. Your grandma said that? Uh-huh. She told Mrs. Wilson at the grocery store that it was a shame because you two were cute together, even though he looks like he eats gravel for breakfast. Despite everything, Harper laughed. Well, that's time for our presentation, folks. Principal Woodson's voice boomed through the PA system. If everyone could gather near the stage, we're going to hear from our wonderful teachers about the semester ahead. Harper gave Emma's shoulder a squeeze before making her way to the front of the room, speech note cards clutched in her slightly trembling hands. She took her spot in the line of faculty members, focusing on her breathing while various administrative announcements droned on. And now, as is tradition, our own Ms. Lane will share a few words about community and belonging, Principal Woodson said, gesturing Harper toward the podium. Standing before the microphone, Harper surveyed the packed multi-purpose room. Familiar faces of parents, colleagues, and town members filled the rows of folding chairs. Mrs. Berkowitz winked from the 3rd row. The Hendersons nodded encouragingly from near the back. Her prepared notes suddenly seemed inadequate for the emotions swirling inside her. Community isn't just about sharing space, Harper began, her voice steady despite her nerves. It's about being seen, truly seen for who you are. She glanced down at her note cards but found herself setting them aside. Tonight she needed to speak from somewhere deeper. In Briar Hollow, I found people who let me be exactly as much as I am, she continued, her hands finding the edge of the podium. Who taught me that belonging isn't about changing yourself to fit, but finding the places and people who make room for all of you. A slight movement at the back of the room caught her eye. A tall figure slipped in quietly, standing against the wall in navy coveralls that bore the Hawthorne Auto Repair logo, as if he came straight from the garage. Wes. His presence hit her with physical force, desire and hurt and confusion colliding beneath her ribs. Their eyes locked across the crowded room, and Harper faltered mid-sentence, losing her train of thought completely. For one breathless moment the entire room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them and the wreckage of whatever they'd almost been. She blinked, forced herself to look away, and recovered quickly. Even when we make mistakes, she said, her voice carrying a new vulnerability that wasn't there before, this community gives us the chance to learn from them, to grow. To fix what's broken. As she finished her speech to polite applause, Harper was painfully aware of Wes's eyes on her, though she kept her gaze fixed firmly on the friendly faces in the front row. For the next hour she circulated through the room, laughing at the right moments, answering questions about curriculum, and steadfastly avoiding the corner where Wes remained. He didn't approach her, but he didn't leave either, hovering at the edges of conversations, occasionally exchanging words with parents whose vehicles he'd serviced. "I think tall, dark, and emotionally constipated is trying to make eye contact with you," Lila murmured as they restocked the cookie tray. "Well, he can keep trying," Harper replied, arranging pumpkin-shaped sugar cookies with unnecessary focus. As the evening wound down and families began departing, Harper found herself alone in her classroom, straightening chairs and gathering discarded craft supplies. The hallway beyond her door grew quieter as the building emptied, leaving her with only the hum of the old radiator for company. Until a shadow fell across the doorway. Harper looked up to find Wes standing there, hands shoved deep in his coverall pockets, looking both completely out of place and somehow exactly right among the colorful bulletin boards that featured his name listed under "Community Helpers Who Keep Us Safe." "Your speech was really good," he offered awkwardly, not quite meeting her eyes. Harper continued arranging chairs, needing the distraction of movement. "Thanks for coming. I didn't expect to see you. I told your kids I'd be here when they came for that field trip to the garage." "That was 3 weeks ago, Wes." She kept her voice neutral, professional, Ms. Lane's voice, not Harper's. "You didn't have to keep that promise." He shifted his weight, looking more uncomfortable than she'd ever seen him. "I wanted to." The silence stretched between them, filling with all the things neither seemed able to say. Harper stacked paper plates, straightened a row of glue sticks, wiped invisible dust from her desk, anything to avoid looking directly at him. "I'm sorry I've been hard to reach," he said finally. "Hard to reach," she repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Harper? You know what?" She finally turned to face him, heart pounding. "I don't actually need an explanation. The fake relationship had to end sometime, right? Maybe it's better this way." Wes flinched as if she'd struck him. "Is that what you think this is about? Was any of it real, Wes?" Her voice was quiet but unflinching, demanding honesty. "Or was I imagining everything?" He looked pained, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "It was real," he admitted. "That's the problem." "What does that even mean?" "It means," he stopped, frustrated. "I heard some guys at the hardware store talking about us. About how you could do better than a grease monkey with trust issues." He swallowed hard. "And they're right. You're this bright, amazing person who makes everyone feel special just by existing, and he gestured at himself. "I fix cars. I barely graduated high school. I've never even left this county." Harper stared at him, understanding dawning slowly and painfully. "So you decided for both of us?" She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough to smell the familiar scent of motor oil and pine that clung to him. "You don't get to decide what I deserve or what I want, Wes." Her voice wavered, but her resolve didn't. I hoped, you'd figured out that I'm in love with you. But I won't chase someone who runs away." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. She watched his face as the confession registered, the widening of his eyes, the slight parting of his lips. But the moment of vulnerability passed too quickly, replaced by the carefully neutral expression she'd come to recognize as his emotional armor. Harper sighed, suddenly bone-tired. She reached out and touched his cheek briefly, a final gesture of tenderness that hurt more than she'd expected. "The fake relationship is officially over. You're off the hook." She gathered her tote bag and keys, moving toward the door with as much dignity as she could muster. At the threshold she paused, not looking back at him. "But what could have been real? That's on you." The classroom door closed softly behind her, leaving Wes alone among tiny chairs and children's artwork featuring a mechanic who fixed more than just engines.
12. The porch light. Wes sat motionless on the creaking porch swing at the Hawthorne house, the evening air crisp with approaching winter. The half-empty mug of coffee beside him had gone cold hours ago. His gaze remained fixed on the porch steps, specifically the second one he'd repaired months ago for Harper. His hands felt useless now, capable of fixing everything except what mattered most. He flexed his fingers, calloused and perpetually stained with engine grease despite his best scrubbing efforts. The same hands that could rebuild a transmission in an afternoon couldn't figure out how to hold on to the one person who'd managed to get under his skin in a way that terrified and exhilarated him. Harper's face when she'd walked away from him haunted his dreams. Not angry, that would have been easier. just resigned, like she'd finally confirmed what she'd suspected all along, that he wasn't worth the trouble. The screen door squeaked open behind him, but Wes didn't turn. Grandma June settled beside him on the swing, her floral perfume familiar and comforting. For several minutes they rocked in silence, the rhythm as steady as the mechanics of an engine. Finally she spoke. "Your grandfather proposed to me on these steps, you know." Wes made a non-committal noise, not particularly in the mood for one of June's trips down memory lane. His grandmother had a knack for serving up life lessons thinly disguised as reminiscence. June's weathered hand smoothed over her cardigan as she continued. "I turned him down the first time." This got Wes's attention, his head turning in surprise. June smiled at the memory. "I was scared. He was so sure, and I wasn't. He built this swing afterward, said he'd wait until I was ready." The parallels weren't lost on Wes, who stared at his oil-stained hands. His grandfather had always seemed like the surest man he'd ever known, steady and unwavering. The thought of him waiting, uncertain on these same steps, was hard to imagine. "She said she loves me," Wes admitted, the words feeling strange in his mouth. June nodded, unsurprised. "And you ran?" It wasn't a question. Wes looked up at the darkening sky, searching for the right words. "I heard some guys talking. Said she deserves better than." He gestured vaguely at himself, the perpetually grease-stained clothes, the calloused hands, the too quiet demeanor. June made a dismissive noise. "Since when does Wesley Hawthorne care what Jeff Simmons thinks? That boy couldn't change his own oil if his life depended on it." "It's not just him." Wes leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Harper's this light. She makes construction paper crowns for her students and remembers everyone's birthday and laughs at her own jokes. And I'm—" He trailed off, the ending obvious. "You're what? The man who stays up all night fixing Mrs. Pearson's heater when it breaks in February? The one who taught Tommy Morris how to rebuild an engine after his father left." June's voice had an edge to it now. "The one who fixed Harper's porch step without being asked." The swing creaked as June turned to face him fully. "You've spent your whole life fixing things, Wesley. Cars, motorcycles, porches." She tapped his chest lightly. "But fixing things isn't always about nails and wrenches. Sometimes it's about showing up. Especially when you're scared." Wes absorbed her words, letting them sink past his defenses. His grandmother had always had a way of cutting through his excuses with surgical precision. "I didn't think it was real," he said finally. "The whole thing started as this accident." "Most of the best things in life are accidents," June countered. "Your grandfather spilled coffee all over my new dress the day we met. I was furious." Her smile softened at the memory. "But he showed up the next day with a replacement and a terrible joke. Showing up matters, Wesley." She patted his knee and stood, her joints protesting audibly. "I'm going to bed. There's leftover pot roast in the fridge if you get hungry." "And Wesley?" She paused at the door. "That girl didn't fall in love with who you think you should be. She fell in love with who you are. Might be worth considering." The screen door closed with a gentle snap, leaving Wes alone with thoughts that refused to settle. As darkness fell completely, Wes retreated to his garage apartment above the detached workshop. The space felt emptier now, haunted by memories of Harper curled on his couch, laughing at his sparse decor. "You have exactly one decorative item," she teased, pointing to the vintage motorcycle advertisement he'd framed. "And it's still car-related." He grabbed a legal pad and a pen from the small desk in the corner, then sat heavily on the edge of his bed. Words had never been his strong suit. He could explain the intricate workings of an engine with smooth confidence, but trying to articulate feelings left him tongue-tied and frustrated. Wes pulled out a piece of paper and began writing, crossing out, rewriting, struggling to find words that weren't dismissive or guarded. His first attempt sounded like a repair manual. The second was too stiff, the third too vague. It took 7 attempts before he had something honest. "Harper, I'm no good at this. You know that better than anyone. When you told me how you felt, I froze up like a bad engine in winter. Not because I didn't feel the same, but because I did. When I heard those guys say you deserve better, it confirmed what I've been afraid of since this whole thing started, that eventually you'd realize it too. You fill rooms with light. I've spent most of my life in shadows fixing things nobody sees. But you see me. And that scares me more than anything. What started as fake turned into the most real thing I've ever had, and I didn't know how to handle it. I'm sorry I walked away. I'm sorry I made you think, even for a second, that what we had wasn't real. I love you. I probably have, since you accidentally won me at that damn auction and looked at me like I was a math problem you couldn't solve. I just didn't think I was allowed to. Wes. He stared at the paper for a long time, almost crumpling it twice before folding it and shoving it in his pocket. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And maybe that was all he had to offer. Wes drove to Harper's house just after 10 p.m., her street quiet except for distant wind chimes. Her porch light was on, illuminating the steps he fixed. He sat on them for a long moment, gathering courage, before finally approaching her door. His knock sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. He waited, heart knocking against his ribs. No answer came. Wes waited, then knocked again, noticing a flicker of movement behind the curtains. Still no response. He placed his forehead against the door, speaking to the painted wood. Harper, I know you're there. I don't blame you for not answering. But I'm not leaving. He sat back down on the steps, prepared to wait all night if necessary. The air grew colder, seeping through his jacket. Wes didn't move. The note in his pocket seemed to burn against his leg, a physical reminder of everything he needed to say. 23 minutes passed. Wes counted each one, watching his breath form clouds in the cooling air. Finally the door opened, revealing Harper in pajama pants and an oversized sweater, her eyes slightly red. She didn't invite him in, just looked at him questioningly, arms crossed protectively over her chest. I thought you might be asleep, he said, knowing how lame it sounded. I wasn't. Her voice was quiet but steady. Wes stood, wiping suddenly damp palms on his jeans. I wrote you something, he said quietly, holding out the folded paper. I'm not good at saying things out loud. But I needed you to know. Harper hesitated before taking it, unfolding it slowly. Wes watched her face as she read his awkward, honest words, about fear and worthiness, about how her brightness didn't make him feel shadowed but seen, about how real it all became when he wasn't looking. She read it once, her expression carefully neutral, then read it again more slowly. Wes held his breath, feeling more exposed than he'd ever been. When Harper finally looked up, her eyes were shining. Why now, Wes? What changed? She asked, her voice soft but steady. He took a deep breath, meeting her eyes directly, no hiding, no guardedness. Nothing changed. That's the point. I'm still me, grumpy, quiet, afraid of losing people. But the difference is, I'm more afraid of losing you than I am of being not enough. Harper's gaze searched his face, looking for the truth behind his words. Wes didn't look away, didn't retreat into the comfortable distance he usually maintained. He'd spent weeks holding back, and where had it gotten him? Standing alone on a porch at 10:30 at night, missing her laugh and the way she always smelled vaguely of craft glue. The silence between them stretched, filled with the weight of possibility. Finally, Harper stepped back slightly, opening the door wider, not an enthusiastic welcome but an opportunity. You can come in. But we have a lot to talk about, and I need you to actually talk this time. Wes nodded, understanding the gravity of her terms. As he crossed the threshold, he didn't reach for her, respecting the fragile new space between them. But when she closed the door behind him, shutting out the night, he felt something in his chest slowly unclench. Harper's living room looked exactly as he remembered it. Colorful throws draped over her second-hand couch, student artwork displayed proudly on the fridge, and plants named after authors crowding every windowsill. A half-graded stack of papers sat on her coffee table. He wondered if she'd been trying to distract herself with work. Do you want something to drink? She asked, the politeness feeling strange between them after everything they'd shared. No, I'm fine. They moved to her couch, the distance between them smaller but intentional. Wes felt acutely aware of every inch separating them, remembering how naturally they'd fit together just weeks ago. You said you wanted to talk, Harper prompted after a moment of awkward silence. Wes took a deep breath. I've never been good at this part. The feeling part. He glanced over, finding her watching him intently. When you came to the garage that first time to apologize for the auction, I was so sure you were just being nice. Because that's who you are. Nice. I'm not always nice, Harper countered quietly. No, you're not, he agreed, surprising her. You're stubborn, and sometimes you talk over movies, and you have strong opinions about fictional characters that make no sense to me. The hint of a smile touched her lips, encouraging him to continue. But you're real, Harper. Every chaotic, wonderful part of you is real. And that scared you, she guessed. Wes nodded. I've spent most of my life dealing with things I can understand. Engines. Tools. Problems with clear solutions. He picked at a loose thread on his jeans. You were never a problem I could solve. And what we started feeling. He shook his head. I don't have the right tools for that. When I heard those guys talking about you deserving better, it confirmed every fear I had. That eventually, you'd realize I wasn't enough. That I couldn't be the kind of person who deserves someone like you. That wasn't your decision to make, Harper said, a hint of frustration breaking through. You don't get to decide what I deserve or who's enough for me. I know that now, Wes admitted. Or I'm trying to. Words came slowly at first, then more easily as the night deepened. Real words, hard words, hopeful words. Wes told her about growing up with a father who fixed everything but said little, about losing his parents and retreating into the garage where problems made sense, about how terrified he'd been when he realized their pretend relationship had become the most real thing in his life. Harper shared too, her fears of being too much, of overwhelming people with her enthusiasm, of the ex-fiancé who'd called her exhausting before walking away. How Wes's quiet steadiness had made her feel anchored instead of tethered. When you fixed my porch step, she said softly, no one had ever done anything like that for me before. Not without making it a big deal, or expecting something in return. It was just a step, Wes shrugged. No, it wasn't. Harper shook her head. It was you seeing something I needed before I asked. It was you caring without needing recognition. Somewhere around 2 a.m., the distance between them had disappeared completely, replaced by intertwined fingers and tentative plans for a future neither was running from anymore. Harper's head rested against his shoulder, her voice growing sleepy as she described the fall carnival her class was planning. I want you to come, she said. Not as my fake boyfriend. As my real one. Wes tightened his fingers around hers. I'd like that. By the time dawn's pale light filtered through Harper's curtains, they'd talked more than Wes had in possibly his entire life. His throat felt raw, but the tightness in his chest had eased, replaced by something warm and unfamiliar but not unwelcome. We should probably get some sleep, Harper murmured, though neither made a move to separate. Probably, Wes agreed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. She looked up at him, her expression soft but serious. If we're really doing this, really trying, you have to promise me something. Anything, he said, meaning it. No more running. No more assuming what I feel or what I want. When you're scared or doubtful, you talk to me. Even if the words don't come out right. Wes nodded, leaning his forehead against hers. I promise. No more running. As morning light strengthened, they remained on the couch, the space between them non-existent now, talking softly about small things and big things and everything in between. For the first time in weeks, Wes felt the tension in his shoulders release. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, and for once he wasn't looking for an exit.
13. Betting on U.S. Harper adjusted her burnt orange cardigan and checked her reflection in her compact mirror one last time. The Fall Harvest Festival's closing ceremony began in 10 minutes, and for once, she wasn't worried about being perfectly put together. She tucked her ever-present glitter pen behind her ear and smiled at herself, a genuine smile that reached her eyes in a way it hadn't in weeks. You're gonna blind someone with that smile, Harps. Harper snapped her compact shut to find Lila leaning against the bathroom doorframe, arms crossed and eyebrows raised in that knowing way of hers. Is it that obvious? Harper asked, smoothing her hands down her cardigan. That you're stupidly happy? Yeah? Lila's expression softened. It's a good look on you. Harper felt the warmth bloom across her cheeks. 2 weeks since that night on her porch when Wes had handed her that note, his handwriting surprisingly neat for a man who fixed engines for a living. 2 weeks of cautious smiles turning into real ones, of learning what it meant to be together without an audience. Thanks for not saying I told you so, Harper said, tucking her compact into her purse. Oh, I'm definitely saying it. I told you so. Lila grinned. But I'll wait until after this ceremony thing. I need to get back and make sure my kids don't dismantle the art display before judging. Harper laughed. Go save the popsicle stick masterpieces. I'll see you out there. As Lila disappeared, Harper took one more steadying breath. This wasn't the first time she'd walked through Briar Hollow as one half of Harper and Wes. But it was the first time it felt completely real. When she stepped outside, the late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light. Wes waited for her by the gazebo, hands in his pockets, watching her approach with an expression that still made Harper's heart skip. 2 weeks since their reconciliation, and she still felt a little thrill seeing him look at her that way, like she was both a miracle and completely home at the same time. Ready for the grand finale? He asked, offering his hand. Harper laced her fingers through his, noting how natural it felt now. As ready as anyone can be, for Mayor TJ's speech about the spiritual significance of pumpkins. I heard this year he's comparing them to the circle of community, Wes said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a way that made focusing difficult. That's better than last year's seeds of opportunity metaphor, at least. They walked together toward the festival grounds, where fairy lights twinkled against the early evening sky. The transformation felt surreal, from that first accidental bid to now, fingers intertwined without hesitation or pretense. Remember when you could barely look at me without scowling? Harper teased, bumping her shoulder against his arm. Wes's mouth quirked into that half-smile she loved. I was scowling at myself, not you. She pretended to consider this. So when you glared at me for knocking over that entire display of motor oil. That was about the oil, he admitted, but I also thought you looked cute when you panicked. Harper gasped in mock outrage. Wesley Hawthorne. You let me think you hated me. I never hated you. His voice dropped lower, private despite the growing crowd around them. That was the problem. The town square bustled with activity, vendors packing up, children with face paint running between booths, the last of the apple cider being served. Several people waved and called out to them, no longer with the knowing smirks of before, but with genuine warmth. Mrs. Henderson winked at them from her pie stand. Told you the gazebo was magical, didn't I? The elderly woman called out. Harper felt her cheeks warm, remembering the first real kiss she and Wes had shared there, hidden from prying eyes, or so they'd thought. Apparently in Briar Hollow, nothing stayed secret for long. We owe you a pie plate, Wes called back, which made Mrs. Henderson cackle with delight. As they wound through the crowd, Harper tried to pinpoint when exactly this had become her life. Was it when she'd sneezed at the auction? When Wes fixed her porch step without being asked? Or that rain-soaked moment in the corn maze when they'd almost, but hadn't quite, admitted what was happening between them? Stop thinking so hard, Wes murmured close to her ear. I can practically hear the gears turning. Just taking inventory, Harper replied. Of all the moments that led here. Any favorites? She glanced up at him, finding his eyes already on her. Maybe I'll tell you later. Mayor Fletcher sprung up onto the temporary stage, his bow tie festively patterned with pumpkins. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors. And now Briar Hollow's time-honored tradition, our Fall Festival Awards. Harper and Wes found seats near the back, on the very bench they built together. Wes ran his fingers along the leaf pattern carved into the armrest, a quiet acknowledgement of their journey. Harper had insisted on adding the decorative touches, because functionality needs a little beauty, Wes, and he'd grumbled until he didn't. This bench turned out pretty good, he said now, his shoulder warm against hers. We make a decent team. Harper leaned against him slightly. Even if you did try to talk me out of the leaf details. They're growing on me, he admitted. Then with a completely straight face, like fungus. She smacked his arm lightly, but her laughter gave her away. Awards were presented with Mayor Fletcher's typical enthusiasm. Best Pie, Mrs. Henderson for the 5th year running, Most Creative Scarecrow, the 3rd grade class with Harper accepting on their behalf, Harvest Hero, Farmer McIntosh. Harper relaxed against Wes's shoulder, content in a way she never expected to be again after the heartbreak of last month. When she returned to her seat after accepting the Scarecrow Award, Wes's arm settled around her shoulders naturally. The ease of it, this quiet public declaration, made her heart flutter in her chest. Your kids are talented, he murmured. They really are. Though I had to talk Toby out of using real worms for the hair. Wes smiled. Kids got vision. From several rows ahead, Harper spotted Grandma June turning to give them a thumbs up. The older woman had been uncharacteristically restrained lately, limiting herself to one "I knew it all along" per day, which for June showed impressive self-control. Your grandmother is plotting something, Harper whispered. She's always plotting something, Wes replied. But I'm pretty sure this time it's just the gloating phase. And now, the mayor announced with a dramatic pause, the moment many have been waiting for, Briar Hollow's cutest couple. A dramatic pause followed. And the winners are Harper Lane and Wesley Hawthorne. The crowd erupted in applause as Harper's eyes widened. Unlike last year when she ducked out embarrassed, this time, Wes stood and extended his hand to her with a confidence that made her chest tighten with emotion. Did you know about this? She asked, rising to meet him. Not a clue, he said. But I'll take it. As they made their way to the stage, Harper spotted Grandma June in the front row beaming with unabashed pride. Beside her, Lila gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. The collective gaze of the town, once a source of mortification, now felt like a warm embrace of community. Mayor Fletcher handed them a small trophy shaped like a cornucopia. "Any words for the crowd?" he asked, offering the microphone. Harper looked at Wes, who nodded slightly, encouraging her to speak. She took a deep breath, scanning the familiar faces before her, the town that had become more home than any place she'd ever lived. "I came to Briar Hollow looking for a fresh start," Harper began, her teacher voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "What I found was belonging. And sometimes," she glanced at Wes, who watched her with such open affection it almost undid her, "sometimes the best bets are the accidental ones." The crowd responded with appreciative laughter and scattered applause. Wes surprised everyone, Harper most of all, by gently taking the microphone. "What she's trying to say," he added with quiet sincerity, "is that I'm the luckiest accidental auction win in Briar Hollow history." Before Harper could respond, he kissed her. Not the careful, measured kisses they'd shared in private since reconciling, but something immediate and certain, right there on stage in front of everyone. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Cheers, applause, and what sounded suspiciously like Grandma June declaring, "That's $20 you owe me, Edith." Harper was still catching her breath when Wes led her back down the steps, trophy tucked under one arm, his other hand firmly holding hers. "That was," she started, trying to find the words. "Too much?" His expression held a flash of uncertainty. "Perfect," she finished, squeezing his hand. "Just unexpected from Mr. I hate public displays." He shrugged, but she caught the smile tugging at his lips. "I'm making an exception." As they weaved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Harper felt wrapped in a bubble of happiness so complete it almost scared her. Mrs. Jasper pressed a jar of her famous apple butter into Harper's hands, for the happy couple. Lila mouthed, "Told you so," from across the square. Even Mr. Peterson, who complained about everything on principle, nodded approvingly. "Should we escape before someone asks us to kiss again?" Harper suggested, after the fifth person had mentioned how adorable they were. "Coward," Wes teased, but he was already steering them toward the exit. Harper noticed their bench as they passed, solid, beautiful, built to last. It sat under a maple tree, leaves turning gold and crimson above it. Someone had placed a small plaque on the back that read, "Hawthorne and Lane, Fall Festival Champions." "They added a plaque," she said, pointing. Wes paused to look, his expression softening. "Looks official now." "So," she said, leaning into Wes's side as they walked toward the exit, his arm secure around her waist. "Still think our relationship auction was the worst idea ever?" He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Second worst," he corrected with a smile. "The worst was trying to convince myself I didn't love you." Harper's heart felt full enough to burst as they walked toward his truck, no longer pretending, no longer afraid, heading home together under a canopy of autumn stars. "For the record," she said as they reached his truck, "I love you too." "I know." His smile was soft in the fading light as he opened her door. "You're not exactly subtle, Harper Lane. And you love that about me. Among other things." He leaned in, his forehead touching hers for a moment. "Want to go home and I'll tell you all of them?" "Home sounds perfect," she whispered, knowing he meant her little cottage with the porch step he'd fixed, the place that had somehow become theirs in all the ways that mattered. The trophy sat between them on the seat as Wes drove through familiar streets, past the school where her classroom waited for Monday morning, past Hawthorne Auto where his wrench still hung on the pegboard. Harper followed the path with her eyes, seeing not just buildings, but a future unfolding, one she never could have planned but now couldn't imagine living without. "What are you thinking about?" Wes asked, his eyes still on the road. Harper smiled, watching his profile in the dashboard light. "Just that sometimes the best things happen when you're not looking for them." His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "Or when you sneeze at exactly the wrong moment." "Best sneeze of my life," Harper declared with absolute conviction. And as they pulled into her driveway, their driveway really, given how often his truck was parked there now, Harper felt the last piece of her heart settle into place. Tomorrow there would be papers to grade and engines to fix. But tonight there was just this. A man who looked at her like she hung the stars, a town that had become family, and a future that promised to be anything but boring. Epilogue, The Porch and the Pencil Cup. Harper stood before her second-grade classroom on a crisp Friday afternoon, the autumn light streaming through windows decorated with paper maple leaves. Her hands moved expressively as she explained one of English's quirky rules. "And that's why," she said, gesturing dramatically, "the letter Q is almost always followed by the letter U. They're best friends who stick together." A chorus of oohs followed as Harper smoothed her polka-dotted dress and checked the classroom clock hanging above the whiteboard. 3 more activities before the final bell. The day had flown by in that wonderful blur of learning and laughter that made her love teaching so much. She'd been extra animated today, possibly because of the surprise waiting for her after school. Wes had texted during lunch, "Got off early. Dinner tonight?" Even now, 8 months into their relationship, those simple messages sent a flutter through her chest. She still had the very first note he'd written her folded in her wallet, just 3 words, "I'm all in." Sometimes she took it out just to trace his handwriting with her fingertip. "Show and tell time," Harper announced, settling into her reading chair. A colorful wingback she'd rescued from a yard sale and reupholstered with fabric covered in cartoon dinosaurs. Her students scrambled to their cubbies, retrieving treasures wrapped in tissue paper or hidden in backpacks. Harper caught sight of her reflection in the classroom window. Her smile came easier these days, more permanent than temporary. The constant knot of anxiety that had lived between her shoulder blades in the city had loosened, replaced by a steady contentment she'd never expected to find. Eliza went first, proudly displaying a shiny rock collection arranged meticulously in a compartmentalized box. "This one's rose quartz," she explained seriously. "It helps with love, like for Ms. Lane and Mr. Wes." Harper bit back a laugh. Apparently, her love life remained a fascinating topic among her students, right up there with dinosaurs and outer space. Next came Mateo with his grandfather's harmonica, which he played with surprising skill for a 7-year-old. The slightly off-key rendition of "You Are My Sunshine" made Harper's heart swell. She clapped enthusiastically when he finished with a dramatic bow. Jaden followed, stepping forward with a praying mantis in a ventilated jar, which Harper admired from a safe distance. "His name is Captain Crunch," Jaden announced proudly. "He ate a butterfly yesterday." The classroom buzzed with that particular Friday afternoon energy, part chaos, part joy, that Harper had learned to channel rather than contain. When she first started teaching, she'd tried to maintain perfect order until the final bell. Now she knew better. Fridays needed space for the week's excitement to spill over, like a pot of water reaching its boiling point. "My turn, Ms. Lane," called Sophie, bouncing to the front of the room. Her pigtails bobbed with each step as she clutched something in her small hand. She held up a sparkly pink pen that Harper immediately recognized, one of her own glitter pens that had mysteriously disappeared months ago during the town's fall festival. "This used to be Ms. Lane's special pen," Sophie announced importantly, her voice carrying the weight of someone sharing classified information. "But she gave it to me after she started liking Mr. Wes instead." The class erupted in giggles and theatrical oohs as Harper felt warmth creep into her cheeks. Her relationship with Wes had become something of a classroom legend, the teacher and the mechanic, an unlikely pair that somehow made perfect sense to everyone, including 23 second graders. "It's true that Mr. Wes is very special to me," she acknowledged with dignity, though her smile betrayed her. "But I still like glitter pens very much, thank you." Sophie nodded solemnly. "Mr. Wes says glitter is growing on him too." "Literally. He found some in his truck again yesterday." Harper laughed, picturing Wes's face when he discovered yet another patch of glitter on his upholstery. He complained about it regularly, but never actually did anything to remove it completely. She suspected he secretly liked having that small reminder of her in his space. Tyler's hand shot up next, practically vibrating with excitement. "Can I go now?" "Mine's from Mr. Wes." He proudly displayed a small wooden keychain shaped like a wrench. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. Wes had taken to woodworking in the evenings, his large hands surprisingly deft at creating delicate objects. "He made it in his shop. He's teaching me how engines work on Saturdays," Tyler continued, beaming. Several other children chimed in with their own Mr. Wes stories. How he fixed the playground swing during recess last month, built a bookshelf for the reading corner when Harper mentioned needing more storage, brought his motorcycle for them to see during transportation week. Harper listened, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment. She'd never expected Wes to become such a fixture in her classroom. For someone who claimed to be uncomfortable around kids, he certainly spent a lot of time with hers. As if summoned by their chatter, a familiar figure appeared in the classroom doorway, Wes, still in his work clothes, holding a box from the Buttered Biscuit Cafe. His dark hair was slightly mussed, and a smudge of grease marked his forearm where he'd clearly tried to clean up before coming. The children spotted him immediately, a chorus of excited "Mr. Wes" filling the room. Harper's heart did that thing it always did when she saw him unexpectedly. A little flip of joy that hadn't diminished one bit since they dropped the fake from their relationship. Seeing him in her classroom doorway still felt like finding something she hadn't known she was missing. "I heard it was someone's birthday," Wes said, his deep voice carrying easily over the children's excited chatter. He set down the box on Harper's desk, opening it to reveal cupcakes with rainbow sprinkles, Mateo's favorite, Harper realized. She'd mentioned his birthday during breakfast that morning, but hadn't expected Wes to remember. His eyes found Harper's across the room, the corners crinkling in that way that still made her stomach flutter. For a man once described as perpetually grumpy, he smiled a lot these days, especially in this classroom, especially at her. It was a smile nobody else got to see, one that transformed his whole face and made him look younger, lighter. "Perfect timing for our celebration," Harper said, giving him a look filled with surprised gratitude. The children clustered around the cupcakes, exclaiming over the sprinkles and frosting swirls. Harper moved to Wes's side, brushing her fingers against his. "You remembered." He shrugged, but the pleased look in his eyes gave him away. "You mentioned it this morning. Thought the kid deserved something special." The final bell rang, unleashing controlled chaos as backpacks were gathered and weekend plans discussed. Harper coordinated the line at the door, giving each child their customary high five or special handshake. Jamie got a fist bump, Eliza preferred a curtsy, and Tyler had invented a complicated sequence involving jazz hands. Wes helped Tyler tie his shoes, then wiped frosting from Sophie's cheek with the gentle efficiency of someone who had become surprisingly comfortable among small humans. Harper watched him, still slightly amazed at how naturally he'd stepped into this role, gruff but kind, awkward but dependable. "Remember," Harper called as they filed out, "leaf collection on Monday. Find 3 different types." "I'm bringing a red one, a yellow one and an orange one," shouted Ben from the back of the line. "Excellent plan," Harper replied, waving as the last few children disappeared down the hallway, some running to waiting parents, others heading to the bus loop. After the last child departed, Harper closed her classroom door with a contented sigh. The room felt suddenly quiet, the energy shift from full-volume classroom to private space almost tangible. She turned to find Wes leaning against her desk, arms crossed, watching her with that half-smile that still made her heart race. "Cupcake delivery wasn't on your schedule today," she noted, crossing to him and wrapping her arms around his waist. He smelled like motor oil and coffee, and that woodsy aftershave she'd bought him for Christmas. He shrugged, pulling her closer. "The garage closed early. Thought I'd surprise you." His kiss tasted like coffee and possibility, familiar but never routine. Harper melted into it, the week's fatigue dissolving as his hands framed her face with careful tenderness. "You're getting very good at surprises," she murmured when they broke apart. "The kids loved it." "The kids, huh?" He raised an eyebrow, teasing. "And maybe their teacher too." She smiled against his lips. They gathered Harper's things, her tote bag overflowing with papers to grade, lunch container and the 3 children's books she'd borrowed from the library. Wes took the heaviest items without being asked, tucking them under one arm while his free hand sought hers. They walked hand in hand toward the Hawthorne house, now their shared home since Harper's lease ended 3 months ago. The maple trees along the street had turned brilliant gold and red, mimicking the progression of their relationship through seasons of change. Harper breathed deeply, savoring the crisp air and the particular scent of autumn in Briar Hollow, apples and wood smoke and fallen leaves. "Grandma June called," Wes mentioned as they turned the corner onto Maple Street. "The matchmaking committee wants us as judges for next year's bachelor auction." Harper laughed, the sound carried away on the autumn breeze. "Poetic justice." She squeezed his hand. "From auction victims to auction overlords." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd ask you." He glanced down at her. "Thought you might enjoy the power trip." "Absolutely. I can already picture myself with one of those fancy auction gavels," she said, making an exaggerated hammering motion with her free hand. "Sold to the lady with excellent taste in mechanics." Wes rolled his eyes, but his smile gave him away. "You're never going to let me live that down, are you?" "Nope," Harper said cheerfully. Being accidentally auctioned off is going in our wedding toast someday. The words slipped out before she could catch them. They hadn't talked about marriage, not directly, though hints and maybes had been scattered throughout their conversations lately. Harper felt her cheeks warm, but Wes didn't miss a beat, just tightened his grip on her hand. "Grandma June would never let us hear the end of it," he said easily, his tone casual but his eyes serious when they met hers. The Hawthorne house came into view as they rounded the final corner, the white porch gleaming in the afternoon sun, mums blooming in the planters Harper had added last month. The porch swing, newly reinforced and freshly painted, awaited them, as did Sir Percival, Grandma June's cat, who had decided Harper was his second favorite human. He stretched lazily in a patch of sunlight, raising his head to acknowledge their approach with a royal meow. Grandma June herself was out for her Friday bridge club, giving them the house to themselves for a few precious hours. As they settled into the swing's gentle rhythm, Harper leaned her head against Wes's shoulder, feeling the week's tension melt away. "I've been thinking," he said after a comfortable silence. "Dangerous?" Harper teased. Wes reached into his pocket. "Made something for you," he said, casual in that way that Harper now recognized meant it was anything but. He handed her a small wooden keychain, a tiny book with their initials carved inside, the craftsmanship exquisite in its detail. Harper ran her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the precision. "It's beautiful, Wes." "Open it," he said quietly. She did, and found tucked underneath the keychain a folded note written in her old glitter pen, "Still fake dating me?" Harper's eyes met his, bright with tears and laughter. The words took her right back to where they'd begun. A reluctant agreement that had somehow blossomed into everything she'd never known she wanted. "Only every day," she replied softly, leaning into the solid warmth of him as the sun dipped low, painting their porch and their future in hues of gold. Thank you for listening. Please visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment and review.